Welcome everyone to today's public meeting of the Missoula Board of County Commissioners. I'd like to call today's meeting to order. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance of the flag of the United States of America to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Missoula County acknowledges that this event today takes place in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people. We have a number of public announcements before we get into our one public hearing today. So Cheryl, would you like to kick us off with some logistics?
Hello, everyone. If you are joining us for this meeting virtually today, instructions for turning on closed captioning are on your screen. If you are joining us in person, we will have closed captioning on all the screens here in the Sophie Moise room. There will be an opportunity to speak during the meeting for a public comment virtually and in person. We ask that all speakers today speak slowly and clearly. This helps with the accuracy of the closed captioning. If you are on Microsoft Teams, if you would like to speak when discussion has been open for public comment, we ask that you use the raise hand feature. This is the small hand button. If you're calling in on the phone, you'll need to hit *5 to raise your hand. Once called upon, you will need to hit *6 to unmute. If you have any questions, please find me during the meeting and let me know. We also have assisted listening devices if you need one. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. And by way of introductions, I'm Commissioner Dave Strohmeyer, and joined today by Commissioners Josh Slotnick and Juanita Vero and various staff members. We have 3 proclamations to read today, and we will begin with Ron and Nancy Erickson Day.
All right. Thanks, Dave. I want to lead with this saying that I kind of cut my teeth in civic life. I'm a City County Consolidated Planning Board, and Ron Erickson was a mentor to me there and was a professor when I was a teacher and was a mentor to me there as well. So deep affection for Ron Erickson. Whereas Ron and Nancy Erickson loved the Missoula community in which they lived for almost 60 years, and whereas the Ericksons remained entranced by the beauty of Montana throughout their lives and dedicated themselves to preserving its natural wonders, Ron through his work in local conservation organizations and the state legislature, and Nancy through her art. And whereas the Ericksons demonstrated the power of local activism through their involvement in peace, environmental, and arts action. And whereas even a partial list of the local arts, peace, and environmental groups they worked with boggles the mind. The Patty Canyon Ladies Salon, the Missoula Art Museum, Montana Museum of Art and Culture, Jeanette Rankin Peace Center, Missoula Women for Peace, Western Montana Scientists for Public Information, Concerned Citizens for a Quality Environment, Montana Environmental Information Center, Save the Fort, Missoula Open Space Program, and its Mount Jumbo campaign. And whereas the Ericksons were committed to UM's environmental studies program and art programs, which they supported financially with scholarships and by mentoring dozens of students and colleagues who followed their examples and now work in many service-oriented nonprofits, businesses, agencies, and elected bodies in the Missoula area. And now, therefore, I, Andrea Davis, Mayor of the City of Missoula, and Dave Strohmeyer, Juanita Vero, and Josh Slotnick of the Missoula Board of County Commissioners in the state of Montana hereby recognize the 12th of May, 2024 as Ron and Nancy Erickson Day.
Thank you, Josh. Any comment on that proclamation? Okay. Thanks, Josh. Our second proclamation is in recognition of National Wildfire Preparedness Month. Whereas Western Montana is becoming increasingly susceptible to extreme wildfire conditions, resulting in an elevated risk to our communities, landscapes, and responders. And whereas wildfires in Montana are routinely increasing in size, severity, and duration, resulting in an increased need for communities to adapt to fire while promoting safe and effective response to wildfire and restoring fire-resilient landscapes. And whereas wildfires are a natural part of Western Montana's ecological processes and are critical to a healthy ecosystem, however, the negative impacts of wildfires can be minimized through routine mitigation activities. And whereas Missoula County residents must be encouraged to participate in these activities to better prepare their homes and community to survive wildfire and reduce the burden on our firefighting resources. And whereas local, state, and federal agencies are working in partnership with nonprofit and forestry organizations in Missoula County to increase awareness and provide resources on how to be wildfire ready. Now, therefore, we, the Missoula Board of County Commissioners in the state of Montana, do hereby proclaim the month of May as Wildfire Preparedness Month in Missoula County as a means for education and a call to action for residents and communities to reduce their wildfire risk and to collectively become more wildfire adapted by learning to live with wildfire. And our third and final proclamation today is regarding Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Day. Does anyone have anything to share with us on that last proclamation? Okay, go ahead.
Whereas Missoula County and the city of Missoula join an international effort to heighten awareness in Montana, the Great Plains region, and the United States for murdered and missing Indigenous women. And whereas there is not a comprehensive estimate of Indigenous women who are missing and murdered in the United States, but many factors contribute to the crisis, such as fear, stigma, legal barriers, racism, sexism, and the devastating levels of violence in the U.S. And whereas Native Americans are 2.5 times more likely to experience sexual assault crimes compared to all other races, and 1 in 3 Indigenous women reports having been raped during her lifetime. And whereas 39% are victims of domestic violence, and most violence against Indigenous women is perpetuated by non-Native men, except in rural Alaska villages. And whereas Native Americans are 4 times more likely to go missing in Montana than other demographics, and Montana is among the top 5 states for missing and murdered Indigenous women. And whereas Indigenous women are murdered at 10 times the rate of other ethnicities, and murder is the leading cause of death for Indigenous women. And whereas more than 20 years have been, for more than 20 years, there have been awareness-raising efforts in Canada, and Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women Awareness Day seeks to build support by increasing awareness in the United States. Now, therefore, we, the Missoula Board of County Commissioners and the Mayor of the City of Missoula, do hereby continue to proclaim May 5th, 2024 as Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Awareness Day.
Thank you, Juanita. Any public comment on that proclamation? All right. So as you all know, there's, per the agenda, 1 public hearing today, and it relates to the Western Materials Lolo gravel pit use variance proposal. Now's the opportunity, if you have any public comment on anything else other than that you would like to share with us, come on up. If you're in the Sophie Moise room, introduce yourself and provide your comment. Is there, or if there's anyone online who would like to provide comment on non-agenda items, now's your opportunity. All right, no takers. We will move on to our claims list. Claims received as of April 17, 2024 through April 24th, 2024 by the Commissioner's Office total $980,397.14. As I just mentioned, we have 1 public hearing today. By way of introduction in terms of how we're going to handle this procedurally today, this is a continuation of the public hearing that we had the last time around when many of you were in this room. And that is a public hearing of the Planning and Zoning Commission. The way this will work is at whatever point in time that we close the public hearing and the Planning and Zoning Commission begins its deliberations, the Planning and Zoning Commission will then, and the Planning and Zoning Commission is kind of a funky aspect of state law and these types of zoning districts that we're contemplating today. It includes the 3 county commissioners. It also includes our chief public works officer and also our clerk and recorder and treasurer. It sometimes would include 2 citizen members of the particular zoning district that we are citizen initiated is part 1. Any zoning district. but we do not have those two members. So what you see is what you get in terms of the Planning and Zoning Commission. It will make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, who will then come into session and take up that issue.
Does the Planning and Zoning Commission have to make a recommendation today?
It does not have to make a recommendation today. So the way I see today unfolding is we will begin with a staff report or an update from staff following on whatever update they provided the last time around. Following the staff report, there will be an opportunity, 20 minutes each, for the applicant or applicant's representative to say anything that they would like in support of the proposal. The legal counsel for the opponents, the Carlton Protection Trust, will also have 20 minutes to make statements. We will then open it up to all of you for public comment, both online and in the Sophie Moise room. And could I get a show of hands of folks in the room who would like to maybe make comment today? Okay, there's a smattering of folks. So what I'm going to ask folks to do is please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less when you make comment, and be respectful of one another. There's a diversity of opinions in the room, and I know there are strong feelings one way or another on the proposal before us, so do be respectful. No applause or other outward signs of support or disapproval. And you only get one bite at the apple, so use your 3 minutes wisely. We're not going to get into back and forth conversation here today, so state your comments, and that is your opportunity today. And direct your comments to the chair. That would be me. And if there are questions that you have, we will have an opportunity. The commission, I should say the Planning and Zoning Commission, will have an opportunity later to pursue any comments or questions that you have that we also have additional thoughts on. So without further ado, I would turn it over to staff, Jenny Dixon, with any updates from staff.
Thank you very much. So for the record, my name is Jenny Dixon. I'm a land use planner with PDS, Planning, Development, and Sustainability. I would like to first of all, note that all the materials from the prior two hearings are incorporated into the record, including presentations through these slides, because some of the materials in these slides are not in the packet, and it's important to be able to refer to those in the record. So I'm going to get the slideshow up and running here for you and cover a few topics that we haven't really covered adequately in the last two hearings. Just a reminder of the existing conditions. As you know, there's an existing pit and on approximately 80 acres. They want to expand to the west through a variance to 70 acres. The request for variance is based on criteria established in Title 76, Part 2 zoning, or I'm sorry, Part 1 zoning, with the three criteria being that it would not be contrary to the public interest, that there are special conditions that might warrant a variance, and that a literal enforcement of the Planning and Zoning Commission will result in this unnecessary hardship. And those have been addressed in the staff report that has been before you since February 22nd. I do want to take some time today to clarify some, as much as I can, the operations and permit history, which I know Graham and folks did a really good job with some photos last time, but I would like to supplement that from the perspective of the planning department. And so using some really wonderful photos that Graham and his group got a hold of, I pulled those into the slideshow. And what this photo shows is that there was gravel extraction happening in the 1950s in an area of extraction of approximately an acre. And that's in 1955. By 1966, with a USGS map in 1967 reflecting an existing gravel pit at this location. At this point, it's a little bigger, maybe at 1.5 to 2 acres of extraction area, right? And that's going to be an important key in a minute. And these are the photos where I had to zoom in a little bit from 1982, 1983. It's hard to tell what is happening here, if there's active extraction or not. These photos were purchased by Graham and his group, Carlton Protection Trust. So these photos are available to us thanks to them. They were not available to the land use planner back in 1993, right? Nor was the internet, all right? So in 1993, what happened, as best as I can tell, is that based on the USGS maps showing a gravel pit there, and of this handwritten letter up in the upper left-hand corner of the screen from the applicant, Mr. Hendrickson, stating that he is operating approximately 5 acres of extraction. That also includes storing of material, movement of trucks coming in to load and unload, and that may not all be contained within an extraction area. And then on top of that, there's area that has to then be pulled, soils that get pulled down for reclamation. And so Mr. Hendrickson's letter, which all we can do is you know, suppose that his statements are the area of extraction is about 5 acres, and the remaining area that's needed that will be disturbed is 10 acres. So in 1993, this permit was issued acknowledging that there was an existing gravel pit there, and you can see in the blue circles, the disturbance was the addition of crushing. Then that was going to occupy about an acre of that 15 acres. All right, so in 1983, the best assessment we had, I mean, the way we issued permits back then, people came to the front desk on the spot. We issued permits. And so the planner who signed this was Bud. He used, and he actually in the record, in our files, it shows he used several different, see if I can, oops. He used the maps that were shown here in the lower left. That was all he had to determine what was going on at the site. And essentially based on past activity and the statement by the applicant and the USGS map. This form here that has been at issue where it says at the very last line is not located within an area zoned as residential. This is going to become relevant when I take you to the 2009, the exact same form from DEQ, but reformatted because as best I can tell, I know this is a form letter and it was the way DEQ determined if there was zoning compliance, but there were so many different permutations of how you could find zoning compliance. And in this case, it was legal non-conforming. And that is not language that I believe DEQ uses. They simply would look at it as, are they zoning compliant? As you can see, the top line there is, this is the DEQ's form to find compliance with local zoning. So they send it to us and they say, hey, does this comply with zoning? And because at that time, you could not do gravel extraction in residential, their form letter says, and it's not within an area zoned residential. Now, Bud signed it and was not accurate as far as that, but the gist of what was trying to be conveyed here to DEQ is that this pit, based on, as you can see down below, the letter from Stan Hendrickson and the 4 USGS maps, was zoning compliant, and he probably should have just made a note that it was legal non-conforming. Okay, but he didn't. So fast forward a couple years where they want to do something else, has to do with access. The question came up again because it is it is in a Part 1 zone and it is zone residential, and it was confusing, like, are they legal non-conforming or not? And we did issue a permit in 1993 acknowledging 15 acres as legal non-conforming, zoning compliant. And in 1999, double checked again with the county attorney's office, and that is what that handwritten note is up in the upper left-hand corner, which is from our county attorney's office saying this is a legal non-conforming use, issue the permit for 15 acres. It's still a 15-acre gravel operation because nothing's changed. It's still 15 from 1983. Then we get to 2009. And in that intervening time between 1999 and 2009, there are materials here I did not include because they are DEQ. It was a DEQ application that was submitted, and nothing came to the planning department until 2008, 2009. So in 2009, we issued this zoning compliance permit. This is the point at which there are holes in the situation that I cannot answer, which have to do with how did it go from 15 to 72, other than they did it. And that's where Mike said from the county attorney's office issued a letter to our planning department saying that based on the statute of limitations, it's 7 years, and estoppel, issue this zoning compliance permit for 72 acres. I'm going to show you that same form that DEQ sent us about 15 years later, the one that is this is a revised version of the one that says and is not zone residential. You can see they changed their form because that does not cover every single situation. So instead, what they ask you is, what is it zoned and will it comply with local zoning? And that is what the purpose of that form is, even though it wasn't worded great in 1983 and the planner should have been more meticulous about it. This photo here is showing what was going on in 2009 when that permit was issued by our planning staff. Do you guys have any questions well, wait till the end. So briefly, because we've covered this many times, the proposal, as you know, is to expand that existing area to the west. Western Materials owns the property outlined in red, the southern 20 acres. They want to expand by purchasing the 50 acres in yellow, and they want to not do this, which is if the variance is not approved, but this is the plan of what would happen if the variance is not approved. They would continue mining full 72 acres. The property to the west would likely be sold to residential development, and then upon reclamation of their existing site, it would also be developed with 5 acre tracts for the zone. But what they are proposing with this variance is to not mine on those 5 acre tracts along the north, along the Plain Creek Road. So leave those alone at the higher grade with homes on each of those 5 tracts. Restrict their mined area, shown on the left in red, to that 96.3 acres south of those 5 acre tracts and the wildlife corridor buffer strip, as well as keeping out of the wildlife corridor buffer strip on the south, and mining 96.3 acres instead of 75-ish acres without the variance, but just in a different location. Upon reclamation, then they have agreed through conditions of approval to allow the 6 homes on those 5 acre tracts to be where they're at, and then another 24 homes on that open area that's kind of an envelope for development may occur. The other 110 acres in permanently protected open space. That was proposed as a result of the concerns raised by wildlife agencies regarding wildlife habitat and corridor travel corridors. I have gone through every public comment received since this application was received in October. Um, albeit maybe, I don't know, I looked at in detail the ones that came in last night, but I, I wanted to bring your attention to the issues raised in those letters. Of course, we did receive letters of support. Several of them are in the packet. I'm not going to touch on those. I mean, you can look at those. They're in the record, and the reasons for support are varied and yet similar to staff recommended uh, findings and conclusions for supporting this application. In the staff report in February, we had a finding of that summarized public comment and really the public comment focused on these items. That proposal violates zoning regulations, fails to protect residential areas from industrial activities like mining, that it has detrimental effects on the environment, examples listed there, risks to public health and safety, again, examples listed, and impacts to the surrounding community's quality of life and property values. So those were factors identified for you and findings of fact that as you've been having these hearings, been taking into account. And what I wanted to do for you is summarize the comment that has come in since February 22nd. There's so many letters that I had to kind of hit highlights. So I just had to kind of hit the highlights of those letters. Those impacts that have been identified by residents and not necessarily have basis in our findings of fact that staff would agree that they are impacts to consider, but citizens and people in the area, these are important factors that they want you to take into account. Water usage, irrigation, and impacts on wells, disregard for zoning, and the perception that this is a zoning violation and other legal concerns, livelihood impacts, agricultural and organic certification, fencing, and livestock intrusion into the pit, impacts on the Lola Ranch to the west and their possible desire for conservation easement, infrastructure strain, lack of community input and accountability, long-term environmental consequences, claims of insufficient gravel sources is inaccurate, unsustainable community development pattern, zoning integrity and setting a precedence, that there is no hardship, that this is a question of the permitting process, that there has been lack of transparency and accountability, ethical and moral concerns, overall community opposition, and requests for you to seek alternative solutions. In your contemplation of and consideration of this request, you probably should take into account and address these concerns, whether how you think they're being mitigated, if they are a concern in your mind, that kind of thing. And we can talk more about that as we get further. So I do want to talk for a few minutes about Part 1 versus Part 2 zoning, and then we're going to get to the recommended recommendations, so it won't be much longer. Part 1 zoning is, as I think I've described before, an older type of zoning. It has its own procedures, its own criteria, its own kind of protocol for how things are done within Part 1 zoning that differs from Part 2 and has different advisory bodies and government. Well, the government is the same, but there's a planning board for Part 2 zoning, planning and zoning commission for Part 1 zoning. There's there's a board of adjustment for variances in Part 2 and the planning and zoning commission in Part 1. So this is a Part 1 zone, which unlike Part 2 zoning, authorizes use variances. I know I've said this before, but I think I need to say it again. These Part 1 zones are the only places in the entire county and in Missoula County that allow for use variances. So when the commission and staff are looking at zoning property We are talking about part two zoning because part one zoning is very unwieldy, unworkable, creates opportunities for lack of compliance with growth policy and recommendations and goals and objectives. And so we would prefer that any zoned areas in Missoula are part two, but unfortunately, we are stuck with some part one zoning. And in fact, I think the legislature last session recognized that a lot of communities in the state of Montana want to get rid of part one zoning, and created a pathway to do that in state law. Because we've been trying to help people who want to maintain zoning keep it, but use a process that is a lot more clear and flexible, or not flexible, what as the case may be. So in this case, you have a situation where an applicant can request a use variance. There's a provision in part one zoning about enforcement that I want to just bring your attention to. That if basically if there's non-compliance with the zoning, then the county, in addition to other remedies, may take any appropriate actions or begin proceedings to correct or abate the violation. And so this section of law, whereas that's not how it's written in part two zoning. In this kind of zoning, you are authorized to be able to bring back a land use that is in violation of the zoning and start proceedings to correct it or abate it or restrain it, prevent the occupancy, whatever the case may be. You have that authority through part one zoning. There is reference in county part two zoning to part one zoning, where it describes that if there are administrative procedures lacking in the part one zone, you go to the part two zone. And in this case, it does refer to some standards. ZB40 is the zone that you're in, refers to some general standards, but those administrative procedures were not meant to replace the procedures in state law. So the criteria for the variance, or the body which makes the decision about it, or the enforcement of zoning. So I bring this up because I do believe that was mentioned in the Carrollton Protection Trust letter from yesterday, that the regulations in part two govern this part one. However, this part one is not silent on those things, and therefore that is not applicable. I've provided a handout for everybody, and I believe there are extras on the table in the back, so that if the board and Planning and Zoning Commission get to a point where you want to look at our recommended conditions of approval, we all have something to look at, and I don't have to fiddle around with slides. And it will show you some revisions that I've recommended since the last, and only. Oh. Yeah, yep. Since the last and the only version of recommended conditions. So this is the only modification that you've been presented with since the staff report was first issued on February 22nd. And I've only included here the three conditions which have additional language incorporated to try to address some of the concerns that have come up in the last couple months. One is the berming that is required on the pit, and wanted to clarify that berming is also going to be required along the southeast corner of the pit, which is the spot that's most visible from Old Highway 93 and the Cunningham Court. Down there, you can visually, I mean, it's been like that for a very long time, but one of the conditions is to try to mitigate these impacts for the residents, is to create a berm there that will soften, attempts to soften that visual impact. Also, along the same lines, stockpiles must be kept lower than at a lower elevation than the surrounding berms to the north, south, and west. That's not really possible given the topography of the site to make berms not visible from the east. Although there will be, I'm sorry, piles not visible from the east. There will be berms that will screen it, but you might still see the tops of piles from the east. And then finally, a new condition having to, attempting to address kind of a lifespan of the pit in consultation with the county attorney's office, who weren't real comfortable with the idea of an end date, putting an end date on a business operation, and instead recommend that materials not be able to be transported to this property and processed once they get towards the end of the life of this pit. They are doing that right now, and we'd like to continue. And so,
Jenny, can I swap microphones with you? Does your sound funny to the rest of you? It's hard to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, we can only hear every few words there. So.
can you hear me now better? I'm sorry, I didn't even realize it. Oh.
Okay, go ahead. Well, we can't do that. She can just pull it closer to her mouth.
Yeah,
So.
I have never been told I'm quiet, so I will. I apologize.
If anyone needs a hearing device, we do have those available for folks.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
got it. We're back on track. Thank you, folks. Go
Okay.
ahead, Jenny.
Okay. So recommended conditions of approval with modifications as shown in red. And we all have handout to reflect that. And if and when you get to a point of making motions, that's my last two slides. So that part you got to hear very clearly.
Okay. Thank you. We will now turn it over to the applicant or the applicant's representative. You have 20 minutes to say whatever you'd like to say to us. And you'll have to turn the mic on. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is John Kappas. I'm the president of Western Excavating. Today I will be addressing why this resource meets the 3 criteria for the county in making its determination of approving our variance request. But before jumping to the criteria, I do want to address some of the misrepresentations of facts provided to the commission in the last hearing. Not only was it misleading to this commission, it also inappropriately smeared the reputation of a longstanding member of this community. The attorneys wanted you to believe that this gravel pit is predicated on a lie, based on the represented fact that, quote, Hendrickson attests that the gravel mining operation will comply with Missoula County's zoning regulations and is not located within an area that is zoned residential, end quote. Pardon me. This statement does not accurately reflect the document for which they are referencing, as we've seen earlier today. The document is a zoning compliance form and states it must be signed by an appropriate city county government representative. The form is signed by a county representative who is declaring that the applicant is notifying them of proposing to conduct sand and gravel mining operations. The form also states the operation complies with approved zoning regulations and is not located within an area zoned as residential. Again, the county representative is making the declaration, not the applicant. The attorneys also want you to believe that the applicant was misleading in his statement to the county representative and the pit didn't exist prior to zoning. They state, quote, to obtain the required signature from Missoula County, the named applicant provided a letter explaining that he owns a gravel pit that has been in operation for 40 years, referring to his family's operation along Highway 12, end quote. There is no reference in the applicant's note to his other properties, and it is a very clear reading. He is referring to the land he is applying for a permit, that he owns it, and it has been in operation for 40 years. The applicant was affirming the site had been used for gravel extraction for 40 years and not referring to his other operations. Opposition attorneys have also verified this in their letter to the commission. Quote, importantly, the applicant also includes a 1967 USGS map to support that there is a pre-existing gravel pit in the new desired location, end quote. And we've seen this map earlier today. The attorney's letter also provides an attachment A, an aerial photo from 1966 showing gravel being extracted from the site. As was wisely observed by this commission, it may be the case that this form was the best choice to fill out. Since the applicant was not extracting gravel outside of the original 160-acre property in place at the time of zoning, and the property has been used for gravel extraction prior to zoning, the county representative could technically declare it was not zoned residential for gravel extraction purposes and was being accurate that the operation complies with approved zoning regulations. There's no factual basis from the documents provided that the applicant or county representative did anything wrong, but even further, there is no basis to conclude that there was intentional lying. There was also testimony that identified there has been another pit in this zone district that extracted this gravel resource, and they stated they did everything right. Yet we can find no documentation that they ever went to the county for approval of their operation, their asphalt plant, or their extension to their reclamation date. And that makes sense as they too never extracted from outside the properties that existed at the time of zoning. In contrast, our pit's prior owner determined the best path was to work through the county process, even though he was staying within the property boundaries of the 160 acres. We too have come to the county with the request to extract additional gravel within those same original 160 acres in place at the time of zoning. We feel this process has been beneficial in identifying issues that, while never brought to our attention by the neighborhood prior to this process, can now be adequately addressed. We are committed to conditions that will help the surrounding neighborhood while continuing to have this resource available to the community. Now, moving to the three criteria. We believe the three approval criteria are met with this variance request. First criteria, special conditions of this request. The gravel resource in the expanded area is proven in its use in all types of construction. There is currently no conditional mitigation on the existing pit, and the county would not have as much control if the gravel were to be found in neighboring properties that are unzoned. The proposed request can be conditioned to mitigate concerns of the neighborhood and for wildlife during and post use of gravel extraction. This additional gravel resource will not require additional equipment or plants to be added in the Missoula area, as the plants are already permitted adjacent to this source. The level of operation does not have to change. Since all construction aggregates can be produced out of this resource, it reduces the number of other gravel sites that would be needed to meet the different types of demand. Site conditions allow the operation to sit on the mine floor, reducing visibility, noise, and dust to neighbors. And no gravel extraction will occur in the groundwater, as is necessary at other sites. Second criteria, unnecessary hardship. If this variance is denied, the community will have additional construction costs and be restricted from a viable gravel source. Adding 30 minutes of transport time to truckload doubles the cost of construction material to a project owner. Specifically, if you were to get pit run at the Lolo pit at the current $7 per ton in a 15-ton truck, that $105 worth of gravel will cost another $120 in delivery costs if it comes from 30 minutes away. That additional cost directly adds to the construction cost for the project owner. The Missoula County growth policy goal includes extraction of sand and gravel to meet the needs of the growing population while concurrently protecting natural resources and public health and safety. This location will continue to provide that resource while its own special conditions and the conditions placed on it through mitigation will be the best way to protect natural resources and public health and safety. A gravel operation outside of zoning will not lend itself to this type of county oversight and local concerns. Last time we heard that gravel is ubiquitous. While that statement may be true for gravel, it is not true to sites that have the gravel resource to provide material that meets building standards and can be extracted viably. And that is the reality of the hardship this community faces. I have with me today our manager of quality control of materials. He is a geologist that has spent his career in gravel extraction with other firms and ours, and has tested material in many of the permitted pits, as well as reviewed many potential sites for future gravel expansion. I will give you a brief overview of what this valley is experienced, but he is here today to provide additional specifications. The map provided last week tried to show that gravel exists everywhere in the valley. But as we lay over the map with the community's build out and floodplain, we can see the picture is much different. The resources may be there, the ability to extract is not. Now, there's also the argument that there are numerous pits within the valley based on the number of open cut mining permits. While the original map number 10 in the growth policy showed 66 sites, the current information from DEQ indicates only 33. That's a 50% decrease since 2016. And looking into those permits, many of those are not even active permits of those 33. And we know of only a handful that provide actual sales to the construction world, and none that produce the full range of materials that the Lolo pit produces. The supporting comments this commission has received from the chamber, MEP, city, and engineering firms underscores the community's understanding of this hardship and the reliance of the community on this resource. Third criteria, the variance will not be contrary to the public interest. The zoning allows for the existing gravel pit as a legal non-conforming use, and the variance is not asking for boundaries outside of the 160 acres that was in place at the time of zoning. No additional concrete or asphalt plants will be added to the county with this variance, as those plants are already permitted and can utilize this gravel source. The variance will only increase the area of extraction by 30 acres, which is only a 45% increase to the current size. And that will be less acreage than what existed when both pits were operating. And mitigation conditions have been added to address concerns that have been raised in this process. I'll talk about the conditions that are already in place. We heard about other conditions that are on this. We already have paving from the scale to the access drive that's done on dust. We have track pads in front of the scales to help knock gravel and rocks out of the tires of trucks. We've installed signage inside the pit to better address traffic concerns, and we put white noise beepers on all of our equipment to lower the sound decibels from those backup beepers. The DEQ requires bonding to make sure the reclamation occurs. That bonding covers regrading of the high walls, backfill material, grading of backfill material, grading of the entire site, weed control, fence removal, crushing of asphalt left on site, removal of crusher fines, and indirect costs of that. That's so if we are not there to do the reclamation, the state has enough bond in our name to be able to see that reclamation does take place. Jamie, if we could go to slide 19. So this shows that in reclamation, we will have over 85 acres of dedicated open space that will be available. This slide is to try to show what it will look like. The gravel pit will be reclaimed with sloping of 3 to 1 of all the head walls. The material that is saved from stripping the soil that currently grows vegetation will remain on site, and that's what we will use to build the berms. Those berms then will be spread back over the mine site and planted. This is a view of what it will look like looking to the north and then looking to the south. As to the question that has come up of having a date certain, because the economy can be a driver of gravel use by the community, which can delay the actual use of the resource. A date certain could leave gravel resources unavailable for the community to benefit from in the future. We believe a condition that prevents this gravel pit from processing other gravel pit materials is the best way to be certain the pit stays operational while the community can still benefit from the gravel resource. Once that resource is no longer available, the pit gets reclaimed and no longer is the site processing gravel. We're asking not to eliminate gravel from other pits altogether. Construction jobs often call out different mix designs for concrete and asphalt. And there are cases where there is a certain mix design that is specified that we do not have. So in those specific situations, we need to run a specific gravel source until we have time to create a mix design with a current source on site. So in conclusion, this area has proven to provide an incredible resource to this community for decades. The pit to the east of us and ours provided the gravel of the past, and the current pit is providing the present. Your approval of this variance to extract to the west will provide the future with the continued access to this viable resource. I'll now turn the mic over to our Manager of Quality Control, Dave Blukert, so he can provide you more information pertaining to gravel resources in this valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kappas.
John,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm having problems hearing. I was wondering, can I get a copy of your testimony? Because the audio seems distorted. Or maybe I'm the only one that's feeling that, but
Thank you.
thank you.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Hello, my name is Dave Glukert with Western Excavating. I have 18 years of experience with gravel and the requirements to turn gravel pits into construction products required for local building and infrastructure. My experience has been in geotechnical engineering, construction materials testing, and preliminary pit utilization for aggregate concrete and asphalt production. All of my experience is based in the greater Missoula area. In my experience, gravel is a limited resource that will become more challenging to obtain in our lifetime. The word gravel is a very general term, and not all gravel is the same. We must look at the material in a pit from the largest piece of gravel to the smallest grain of sand. There is much more to a gravel pit feasibility and its ability to create products than meets the eye. One cannot simply look at a geological map and assume that all the alluvial deposits are viable to extract. As shown on the map that John presented for the example, the airport shows available alluvium. Not only is it under the current Missoula Airport, but it's also capped by substantial deposits of clay overburden. These are products we all require for day-to-day life. This trend is happening in our entire country. Much of our gravel resource is becoming more challenging to obtain. Much of our very best gravel is located next to rivers. It can be more challenging to get permitted and operate in floodplain, complicating the extraction of the resource. Many of our surface mines are permitted to terminate just above groundwater, and many of these mines are at, many of our surface mines are permitted to terminate just above groundwater, and many of these mines are at or near the end of life due to these challenges. In Missoula and the Bitterroot Valley, this complicates the extraction of these resources. If permitted to mine below the water table, specialized equipment and additional monitoring are required to making extraction more challenging and costly. To add to this challenge, our quickly expanding housing and infrastructure are sprawling at unforeseen rates. When roads and houses are built on viable mine sites, that resource is gone. This pushes pits further out of town, drastically increasing prices and our carbon footprint to get the said resource back to the cities that are building exponentially. The mining of gravel needs to be economically feasible. This is far more complex than identifying there are rocks on the ground. Assuming you find a viable source, it must be permitted to even consider mining it. The deposit needs to be of a size to justify long-term viability without high percentages of unusable material. The rock must be of a certain hardness to qualify for building materials. The distribution of particle sizes, a consistency to meet the requirements of local and federal specifications to produce road base, asphalt, and concrete. Mines also need to be of the right percentage of particle distribution to balance the mining production of the pit. For example, a pit with only rock. Sorry. Is that better? Okay. For example, a pit with only rock and very little fine particles would be less viable to produce road base or concrete. Concrete sand must meet a very specific, well-graded gradation to make quality concrete and meet required specifications. In fact, many concrete plants are required to haul in or blend offsite materials to create sand capable of making concrete. In contrast, road base requires some silts and clays to bind the materials together to allow for proper compaction. The more distribution of different size particles allows for a wider variety of products that meet city, state, federal specifications, which in turn makes the pit more marketable as a resource. If you can use 100% of the material with no waste, it is a highly viable source. The county should be aware that we are held to the requirements of durability, hardness, particle distribution, clay content, plasticity index, liquid limit, etc. for all products produced for infrastructure and building. These requirements alone disqualify many potential resources. I have personally investigated numerous potential pit locations locally, all of which were passed on due to the gravel or the site missing one or more of the components mentioned to make it economically viable. The Missoula Valley by nature is the product of glacial activity and river deposition. This results in deposits that are high in clays and silts and alternatively river deposition aggregates. To create concrete, clean river depositions are preferred. Alternatively, road-based pits that are higher in silts and clays are required to provide binder for compaction and typically used for asphalt production as well. It is rare to have a gravel pit that can produce all types of construction materials. You will notice that in Missoula County, most pits are either concrete or road base and asphalt. Many pits in Missoula County struggle with the silts and clays left over from the glacial activity. The Lolo pit can produce all three products from one facility due to the nature of the deposition. The Lolo pit is a highly viable source and a huge resource to the community. The rock is of hard nature, the aggregates are subangular, silts and clays are at lower levels to not create issues, and the distribution of the aggregate and sand sizing is of a nature it can meet city, county, state, federal specifications with minimal processing. In addition, when processing the aggregates, the pit provides an almost perfect balance of products, so we end up with virtually no unused products. In addition to the Lolo pit, over the course of my career, I have had experience with numerous pits currently permitted in Missoula County. I will not specify these pits as some are still actively producing material. For the pits I have experience with, many either are at or they are at near end of life or producing with the assistance of outside resources. Very few of these pits make concrete, road base, and asphalt materials from one location, and some that produce road base have at times struggled to meet current construction specifications. The Lolo pit is sitting on a unique gravel source that has not been found to exist in any currently permitted pit, nor at any other potential site in my experience. It is a uniquely rare depositional formation unlike others I have experience with. While I cannot tell you how the gravel source came to be, I can tell you that from my experience in the valley, it is truly unique. Thanks for your time.
All right, thank you. Next, would the legal counsel for Carlton Protection Trust like to come on up? You have We'll give you 21 minutes since our last group went over just a little bit.
All right, good to see you guys again. Can everyone hear me?
You got to pull that really close and talk
All
loud.
right, can everyone hear me?
It's better.
Okay.
Can you use the handheld mic?
Oh, okay.
And
Yep.
if you wouldn't mind, really go loud so everybody. in the
Okay,
back can hear.
I'll make sure everyone can hear me. Okay, well, I'm Taylor Hagan. I'm here with my colleague Graham Coppice. We are the attorneys for the Carleton Protection Trust, as you guys are all aware. I'm going to try to keep things kind of brief here. If you want to pull up our presentation, I believe we sent it to you earlier today. If you want to go to the next slide. And just to make sure everyone in the room, anyone new joining, so we're all on the same page throughout this presentation, if you want to go to slide 2.
Before you go on, I'm sorry
Yeah.
for the audio problems here today.
Sorry, no.
Can we turn that mic? Yeah, there we go.
Oh,
Thank you.
We're getting feedback. Okay. All right. So slide 2 will show again the relevant portions of the zoning resolution that created ZD40. Primarily, I want to focus on the intent here, which was to create a community for low density residential development adjacent to critical resource areas such as aquifer recharge areas and critical wildlife habitats. Again, that's the spirit of this ordinance. This is the intent and the spirit behind creating the zoning district 40 in the first place in 1976. If you want to go to my next slide, and again, I know we've gone through a lot of these facts today, but I will just reiterate, these are at least how we see some of the agreed facts. ZD40 was adopted in 1976, again, to promote that rural residential use. The aerials from 1960 to 1980, as we have seen, do show minimal disturbance, but certainly nothing on the scale of what we see later in 1993. So there may have been 1 to 3 acres, but this subsequently jumped without any kind of zoning compliance to 15 acres and subsequently increased to 72 acres. Again, the zoning ordinance does require that these non-conforming uses or variances be granted by the Board of Commissioners, which has not been done until this application today before you guys. So again, the zoning compliance form that was used with or to obtain that permit or submitted in order to ensure zoning compliance was obtained for the DEQ to issue that permit. It does state that the area is not zoned residential. I think it is clear that that is at least to some degree a misrepresentation. The area was zoned residential. Finally, until 1993, the DEQ has no record of any permitted mining activity. So if there were things going on, they were, again, unpermitted until 1993. Finally, the existing permit does allow mining activity until 2045 with the ability to extend that in perpetuity under at least the DEQ regulations today. And finally, the lot proposed that we're all here discussing is still currently owned by the Liebenguths. So I think those are, again, just some relevant facts that we'd like everyone to be keeping in mind. We can skip the next slide because, again, it just shows that zoning compliance form from 1993. And to Jenny's point, I can appreciate that there is a different maybe level of review for part 1 versus part 2 zoning. That said, I've included these here. I still think they're relevant, and I think there is maybe, something open to interpretation in terms of how you want to interpret the administrative procedures and whether or not Chapter 11 applies to this decision. I would say that the applicants or the application recommendation materials do include findings related to the growth policy and the Lolo regional growth plan. So at some point that was considered by the planning department. In addition, you know, in terms of things like not being based on monetary factors, we do have evidence, or well, we have some indication that at least in 1993, the county attorney determined, here, let me just pull it up, that a general rule in law is that it cannot be a hardship if the applicant or the applicant's predecessor's own making. It has to be a hardship that is unique to the property rather than one that is personal to the applicant, such as a financial hardship. So that does come from the County Commissioner's Journal from 1993. So either way, I would say that those things are still relevant to consider. But what I would like to pay particular attention to today is on our next slide, which is a test that the Montana Supreme Court adopts when they're reviewing these types of variances on appeal. This test comes from a case recently decided in 2017, Carlson v. Yellowstone County Board of Adjustment. It takes the test from a 1980s case, which is also cited there. And that test is that the variance must not be contrary to the public interest, that a literal enforcement of the zoning ordinance must result in unnecessary hardship owing to conditions unique to the property, and finally, that the spirit of the ordinance must be observed and substantial justice done. And so that case, or that test comes from a case, the facts of which are an individual who sought to build a 2,100 square foot garage for his vintage cars, or his vintage car collection. That violated Yellowstone County zoning regulations as to garages being no more than about 1,200 square feet, among other issues with the garage. Carlson, the plaintiff in that case, did undertake to essentially start work on that garage. He hadn't obtained a permit or a variance, a use variance to build that garage. And ultimately, the court did determine that the board was proper in denying that variance request, again, because the situation was of the applicant's own making, and came down to no more than an economic hardship. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Graham to take you guys through some of this criteria in more detail.
Thank you. Hang on just a second.
I'm not sure.
Let's give that a try and see if it's any better.
Thank you.
We love to blame it on the media. So, no, okay. Okay, Mr. Koppas, go ahead.
You can go to the next slide, please.
And you're going to have to turn your microphone on, please. Or use the handhold. Yes, there we go.
You can go next slide, please. And I want to focus here on some of the public interest factors that are relevant here. Thank you all for your time. Let me just start by saying that again, we appreciate the opportunity here to be here today.
And you'll need to hold that mic up close so that you can be heard today.
We appreciate the
Thank you.
opportunity and the reminder. So 3 things that we want you guys to focus on here, including the public interest component of this. And that is that this is a horrible environmental precedent for this body to set. We have very well documented injuries to public health and welfare that are the result of this. We're not just talking about putting a restaurant in an area that doesn't allow commercial uses. We're talking about a well-documented, well-known industry that causes hydrocarbon pollution, that causes carcinogenic material that's inhaled by everybody that lives nearby, that creates all sorts of traffic and regulatory issues for the county to undertake. So this is not a run-of-the-mill request for a use variance. We are talking about industrial scale mining in the middle of a residential neighborhood. So we want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And then we really want this board to consider the negative economic implications of what's going to happen to the public, which is how this body gets money to fund public projects, which is through tax revenue. And this is going to have a direct net negative impact on the county's coffers as a result of decreased property valuations for everybody that's in the immediate area. And while the company was up here touting that it's going to increase its bottom line and it's going to increase its profit for itself, that doesn't have a negative benefit to the public, and instead it's the opposite. So we can go to the next slide. So as we know, Missoula County growth policy does provide for a balancing of gravel resources. We all recognize that gravel is something that is needed to live as a part of a society in which we want to build, which we want to drive roads, which we want to have bridges. Those are realities of the time in which we live. And we're not here pretending that that's not the case. But the Missoula County growth policy very clearly develops a balance between those two competing interests, and it illustrates an understanding that the interests of public health, safety, and welfare are fundamentally at odds with the need for development of this product. And that is often the case that we see in extractive resource industries where we need something as a society, but that has negative externalities which are passed off on the rest of society, generally in the form of pollution, but in this case also loss of property values, et cetera. When we look at what the Montana Supreme Court looked at in Carlson, they identified this issue as being persuasive. The court in Carlson noted that one board member voiced concern that granting the variance would set a precedent of the board permitting significant deviations from zoning regulations. And the same is exactly true here. There is no reading of the zoning regulations that allow for this use. While we do know that there is a variance process that's allowed, which is why we're here, the crux of the issue is the expansion over time on the original property and then the expansion of this through the use variance here today. And while we heard the planning department present and while we heard the company present about that there was some existing use that made this a non-conforming use, it certainly wasn't 72 acres, which is what's occurring today. And what I didn't hear anybody explain was how we got from 3 acres, which was documented in a photograph as Jenny showed in the 1960s, to 1993, then we're permitting 15 acres. And then in 2009, we're permitting 72 acres. And this is the very first time that we were ever coming before this board in a public hearing in any of that expansion. And so there is a significant both environmental precedent and public participation precedent that's being set here, which is essentially we're going to give a stamp of approval on something that has expanded illegally. That's undisputed. There is no permit or public process that has ever given rise to the circumstance that exists on the ground today, and nothing that anybody has presented here sheds any light on anything differently. So I think we really need to focus hard on the precedent that's being set here. And that's on the public participation side. But on the environmental side, essentially, we're talking about a DEQ process that is operating in conjunction with this current zoning process. And I don't know if you all were here in the last week when the governor was here and Donald Trump Jr. was here, and there was a big presentation that happened over at the university. But one of the things that the governor said that he was touting that struck me was he said, and I quote, "We have made it such that if you want a permit, you get it." And that's a part of the red tape initiative. That's part of House Bill 599, which I'm sure the company is aware of, which was the process at the state legislature to strip all regulatory authority from DEQ to regulate this industry. We're talking about a wholly unregulated industry that exists with no control over water quality, no control over noise, no control over air pollution. We're talking about an industry that is essentially granted permits at their request, and that's happening across the state. And as you can see, if you do go look on DEQ's website, which I encourage you all to do, which shows pending permits and shows currently active permits, how many there are. Thousands of these exist. It is an absolute false narrative that this product does not exist in substantial amounts that are necessary to develop as a society. And I do understand that we did hear some evidence today about why this is beneficial to the company, But again, there wasn't any evidence that showed specifically that if we move just outside of this mining district, right, like on the same bench, so on the same side, the west side of the river, if we move just a few miles away outside of this zoning district, that these exact same materials don't exist there. And I'm not a scientist, but it doesn't take much to understand that this deposit doesn't exist only on this 50-acre piece of property. That's an absurd proposition to put forward for you all to believe. And that obviously goes to the unique element here, but it also does talk about the impacts that we're going to impart on the public interest of zoning as a whole, whereas people have expectations in that zoning district. And here, if we're going to grant a use variance for something that is demonstrably and objectively a nuisance, in the sense that it's creating externalized pollution on the neighbors, it's in various forms, it's creating public health and safety impacts that are not mitigatable in any sense of the word, as has been explained here. That is an increase in the permitting significant deviations that the Montana Supreme Court found was very relevant in its decision in Carlson. And I really want you guys to think about the fact that on judicial review, that is what the court is going to be looking at. The court is going to be looking at the conjunctive 3-part test that we have put in the materials for you guys to look at, and they have to prove all 3 of those. And this public interest component, I think, is a significant one, because all of the evidence that I heard today talked about benefits to the company. And again, I stress you to look in the record and find any piece of evidence that shows that the cost savings that were demonstrated and or testified to here today will be passed on to any public body and or to any public consumer. Instead, this is going to increase the bottom line of a private company, which is great, that's fine, but that's not in the public interest. And there is no reading of that that shows that that is a proper public interest criteria. And here on Ron Erickson Day today, I think that we should be looking at the public interest in the sense of something bigger than that, particularly in the sense of the environment. So, as well as public health of everybody that's nearby. You can go to the next slide, and I'll skip through these, but what we know is that there are public health and safety impacts that are at issue here. Those go to a negative public interest implication here. The variance contradicts the Missoula County Lola Regional Plan and will be injurious to this neighborhood and detrimental to public health and welfare in this area. So we can go to the next slide. This is a graph that was in the previous materials, but it shows that there is a well-documented and researched on a national level diminution in property values the closer that you get to the site. So on the right side, we have further away, and on the left side is closest in proximity to the site. So the closer the property is located to a gravel and asphalt mine, the loss in property value increases exponentially on that curve. Those studies were cited in the original materials, and this is well documented on a nationwide scale. And so again, talking about loss of tax value, that's something that should also bear in the public interest consideration for this body, as it's going to result in a net loss of tax revenue. You can go to the next slide. We heard a lot about this material being unique to just this site. I already talked to you about the fact that that really doesn't make any practical sense whatsoever. I didn't see any mapping from the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology that identified as sort of relevant evidence that that was true. Instead, I heard broad scale generalizations about this site being great and this unicorn of material, but that's not how geology works. I think we all understand that on a very basic level. It doesn't pick and choose 50-acre properties and say this exists here and not there. And the point of this for you all to consider is that we could move just outside of this zoning district and alleviate this entire issue. There is no reason that this couldn't be in Ravalli County, where we don't even have zoning. The county line is not that far away, as well as a number of other properties that are going to be located on the same bench, therefore having the same geologic materials deposited that are not in this zoning district. So really, I have not heard anything that shows that there is something unique here. And while we did hear the applicant talk about this not being in a floodplain, and that groundwater will not be mined into, again, DEQ does not regulate those activities in any way, shape, or form. If you want to mine into the groundwater, DEQ will let you do that. And so there is no regulatory reason that they can't do that, which is a totally different conversation about how terrible of a law that is that the legislature left us with. But that is the reality, is that there is no reason that they cannot mine this in the floodplain. There is no reason that they can't mine this anywhere else where there would be essentially a different set of issues. So there really is no special condition or circumstance exist which are peculiar to the land, the lot, or something inherent in the land which causes a hardship, which are not applicable to other lands in the nearby same district. And so that's really what we're looking at here. And that comes again from Carlson, where essentially the court said, Mr. Carlson, you can build your giant garage somewhere else, just not in this zoning district. And you should have known that when you came here, because this zoning district existed at the time when you purchased the property, which is the exact same circumstance here.
Mr. Coppice, you have about a minute left.
Okay. Well, this is not a situation where we're talking about people that didn't do their due diligence, that didn't know. This is a sophisticated mining company with competent legal counsel, with competent corporate representation that knew exactly what they were buying. So we're talking about a property that illegally expanded in the first place. And then we're talking about a buy-sell agreement to purchase property immediately next door when they knew that that also was not properly within the zoned uses of land that could be accommodated there. And so this is a situation where they're coming before you, knowing well, just like the individual, the litigant in Carlson, where the Montana Supreme Court said, no, you should have known better. And that's not a good reason, some existing condition that you want to build this on this land for you to get this use variance. So as the court said, that is an issue of the applicant's own making, which I suggest to you here is the same. All of the benefits that they said and attested to in relation to this being next door to a currently existing project, those are issues that they knew about when they sought to purchase this property in the first place, and those are issues that they would have known about at the time that they first researched this. In conclusion, I'll just wrap up. In 2008, this board took action to enact emergency zoning in Liberty Cove versus Missoula County. And I don't know if you guys remember that, but at that time, the Missoula County Board of Commissioners enacted emergency zoning to stop a gravel mine in a residential neighborhood to protect public health, to protect safety, and to protect the public welfare. That was upheld by the Montana Supreme Court. And the Montana Supreme Court looked at specifically the reasons why this county did that and said that those were the proper reasons to consider. And the same concerns or more support the exact land at issue. And I urge you to think about why in 2008 you would have enacted emergency zoning to protect a neighborhood, but now you're going to enact a use variance to destroy another one. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coppice. So the way we're going to handle this going forward this afternoon with the balance of our time is we will open it up for public comment. Once everyone who wants to speak has had a chance to speak, both in the room and online, we will close the public comment period. We'll close the public hearing. At that point, the Planning and Zoning Commission will have an opportunity to ask questions. If it so chooses, it will deliberate and can take action. I would recommend for the Planning and Zoning Commission, though, that we only take action as the Planning and Zoning Commission if also we're prepared today as the Board of County Commissioners to take action. So that would be my recommendation, all or none today. And there's nothing that compels us to have to make a decision today if the commission or the commissions feel like they need more time. We're needed. Yes, and I have been requested to have a short recess. So let's take 5-minute recess. Do what you need to do and come back at 3:30 and we will begin public testimony. Thank you. Okay, everyone, let us come back into session here. If you could take your seats. All right, we are back in session. This is your opportunity to offer public comment. So I would ask that folks, again, be courteous to one another. You have 3 minutes. You have one opportunity to provide public comment. Once everyone in the room here, the physical room in the courthouse is done offering comment, we'll shift to folks online. When everyone online has finished offering their public comment, we will close the public hearing and move on to discussion amongst the commission members. So with that, if you're in the courthouse in the Sophie Moise room, come on up and feel free to offer your public comment if you'd like.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, commissioners. My name is Liz Heaney, Heaney. And today, in my opinion, I'd like to say that the residents should not have to shoulder the burden from the collective missteps of government, which now allow the gravel pit the ability to spew carcinogenic particulates from their asphalt production and concrete production. This is not a healthful environment for citizens or the environment. The residents deserve a clean and healthful environment according to the Montana Annotated. Knife River is opening a 130-acre gravel pit to the west in a totally unpopulated area, which in my opinion is the appropriate location for a mining operation. So I do ask the commissioners to protect our environment, protect our health by denying the variance today. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person, come on up, sir.
Yes, my name's Alan Foss. I have 2 questions. The pit people showed a picture of the way that the pit was in a given year, and the year doesn't match the pit that Washington used when he put in the 4-lane. I would like to hear the excuse for that. Also, our first meeting here, I was one of the people that started the 5 acres per house. And I said these exact words, is that there was a certain security in having zoning in place that was signed by a group of people like you. And now all of a sudden, you folks may cut all that loose to put in a mine. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And a little bit later on, we'll try to get an answer as far as the photo and the date. Additional public comment, come on up.
Hi, my name is Kevin Sherman. I live in the neighborhood. You know, first, I think I'd like to commend Western Materials for the efforts they put forth so far to do some things in order to be a better neighbor. I appreciate that. I don't have any beef with them over operating their business. My opposition is to granting this variance and letting it expand to the levels that they have in mind. This question I have is probably just going to demonstrate my ignorance, but the applicant has put forth 2 scenarios, scenario 1 and scenario 2. Scenario 2 looks more appealing, right? Has buffer zones and all of these things, lots of good stuff. But my skepticism is that scenario 2 will be adhered to, that it'll be set in stone. I don't know what would if that gravel that's in the buffer zones becomes extremely valuable, what would prevent them from going, well, we liked scenario 2, but now we changed our mind. the gravel is too valuable, we're gonna have to dig into that too. And the other thing we can see is, you know, this property's already changed hands, I think 4 times by my count, since we've been talking about it, its history. And I wonder what assurance there is if it changed hands again, that the new owners would adhere to scenario 2, or could they just mine the whole thing if they own it? So that was one question I had about that. And then as far as part 1 and part 2 zoning, as I understand it, we as citizens would be better off if this had been zoned part 2. We'd have more teeth here, and maybe the applicant would be before a different board. But I don't think it's fair to penalize us for using the only tool that was available at the time, which was part 1 zoning. So that's my comment on that. And I have to go back to this hardship thing. You know, I appreciate that it costs more to haul gravel farther, obviously, but I respectfully submit that it's not my or my neighbor's responsibility to save future developers money and enhance their bottom line at our expense. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. Additional public comment, come on up.
Hi, my name is Randall Cloyd, and me and my wife moved to the area in 1998. And we noticed there was a tiny little gravel pit at the time, but zoning was for no expansion of any existing business. And since that was the only business, we assumed it was assuming that that wouldn't grow. And then Western bought it, and it already has grown dramatically. And with the proposed expansion, it would be really huge compared to the tiny little few acres it was when we first moved in. And I heard the comment in the last hearing, several people says, why did they move to an area that has a gravel pit if they don't want to live by one? Well, there's a big difference between a 3-5 acre gravel pit and 70 acres.
Thank you, Mr. Cloyd. Additional public comment.
Hello.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Alan Alt. What I have to say is, you know, here we go again. It's a big business versus the common person, the resident. It's clear that some mistakes have been made in the past. I just hope this board will do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alt. Additional comment.
Hello.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Louis Harches, and I live on the bench there where all that nice gravel is. I do have a comment about that photo we saw from 1955 and that small little disturbed area. That's not proof that there was a mining operation there. You know, if I go home this evening and I dig up some of that fine gravel in my backyard and I use it to fill some potholes in my road or use it to shore up some irrigation ditches, that doesn't make it a mining operation. Okay, so I look at that and say, that's quite potentially just somebody that was using some gravel. I mean, there was no permit issued for that. So that says it wasn't an industrial mining site. There's no record, IRS records of somebody selling gravel there and paying taxes on it. It's just potentially was just the landowner, 160 acres, using some gravel on his property in one part of his property to maybe shore up his irrigation ditches or fill a hole somewhere or maybe put a road in to his property. So I can't, when they say that there was a history of 40 years of mining operations there, I don't see it. There's no record that proves that. That's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to say was, you know, we're talking about, there's the gravel pit that's there now, which shouldn't have been allowed to get the size it is. That's another issue. But now you're talking about putting a gravel pit on another 70 acres where there has no history of mining on that site. The history is it's been zoned. So, I would ask you to just, vote no on granting this variance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Additional public comment? Come on up. Don't be shy.
Yes, I'm online.
Oh, folks online, if you could just hold off for a second, we're gonna work through everyone here in person and then we'll shift over to you on the phone or online. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Dave Birch. I live up west of where this is proposed. I've been there 20 years. I have bought gravel from the gravel pit because I built a barn and different things. My most recent building is a garage, and I bought gravel from a different pit, okay, down the valley. And these guys were talking, oh, it's going to cost you more if you go down the valley. Well, the same gravel that they said was $7 at their pit was $7 delivered out of the other pit, okay, which is not in Missoula County. And it worked just fine as gravel. So, just another case of them giving misleading information. Other pits prices are fairly similar. Maybe there's a fuel charge difference. But I really think that when Stan had it, he brought it in an 8-yard truck, single axle, 8 yards. The trucks that I see going by there, and I ran down Trader Brothers this morning. Within 20 minutes, there was 2 different trucks there. They're running belly dumps that run 21 to 27 yards in a belly dump. And they're running all day long that way. They're extracting it as fast as they can. I had a business and ran through all the permit processes. And if there was a glitch, that permit was stop ordered. I couldn't continue, much like, the attorney was talking about that garage, or any other permit in the county if it's not up to snuff, or you don't buy a permit and you want to build something and somebody allows the permit guy to be there. They don't let you go on and build for 7-9 years or whatever this went unpermitted. Okay. There's a cease and desist order that you stop till you get the project rectified one way or the other. I really think there's some disconnects here as far as what's going on as far as legalities of permits versus how they use them. That needs to be rectified so we're all on the same page. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Additional comment, come on up.
Good afternoon. My name is Tori Fort. Just a couple quick comments. The first one was in regards to the slides from the presentation from the planning board and also from Western Materials presentation. I just noticed that they had the public interest and they had the hardship, but the spirit of the zoning just seems to be missing whenever we're discussing it. And I think it's a really crucial part of this discussion, which is the zoning was a part 1, and it was the statutes were created, and it's very clearly written why that zoning was put in place, and it was to protect critical natural resources and the wildlife and the rural development. That gravel pit is sitting on top of our aquifer that we all use. There is a wetland right below it that, from what I have understood from a long-standing residence, has changed dramatically over the years. So we just have to protect our water sources, because if we don't have water, we have nothing in that area. We would all have to move, and that would be a substantial hardship for everyone in the neighborhood. Just another thing regarding the talking about the history, I know we rehashed it, and my husband and I spent hours, hundreds of hours, finding all of this information as private citizens. I think that the county and the planning board should have been able to have the same information. But zoning, the zoning back then, the Washington Pit, for example, they got a permit. They had a permit all the time that they were running. There were use variances during that time too. My husband and I found in the county commissioner's journals, the Sun Valley Ranch actually requested a zoning permit, or excuse me, a use variance, and it went in front of the Board of County Commissioners. There have been other people throughout the time from 76 all the way to today that have requested use variances in the same area. And the Sun Valley Ranch is a stone's throw away from this gravel pit. I just don't understand how everybody can do the use variances in the correct way that it's supposed to be done, but for some reason this gravel pit just slipped through the cracks. When it's a gravel pit, it's a big deal. It's something, it's not hidden. Everyone sees it. And the last thing I just wanted to piggyback on the former or previous person speaking of those double trucks. I sit from my window, I can see out on the old highway, which is a small highway that is all beat up. And those trucks are going, if I sit there for a 20-minute period talking to somebody on the phone, there will be 4 or 5 trucks going at that point. When I drive with my 3 children, I have a 1-year-old, I have a 4-year-old, and I have a 7-year-old. And when we get to that intersection that is not made for this much industrial traffic, there are double loaders now. In the last month, there have been double loaders coming in and out. So those are, you can imagine how long. I'm not good with measurements. My husband would laugh at me trying to give a measurement, but they're big. And sometimes we're behind 2 of them, so there will be 4. And then I have to try to go on an uncontrolled intersection into the new highway with 3 little children in the back. It is scary. It is not fun. I try to take alternate routes, but it's the same thing anywhere else because these trucks go both ways. So it's not an area that's conducive for such a large mining operation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. Additional comment?
I'm Janice Brown and I live off of Rowan Road.
And Janice, could you pull that mic close to you?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
I'm Janice Brown and I live off of Rowan Road up above Trader Brothers. So I come down Rowan Road and these big trucks are lined up to get off of the old 93 onto that intersection, and they string out from the entrance to the freeway around the corner and back. And so you know how treacherous that intersection is. There have been a lot of lives lost there. So getting people in and out of that intersection with these commercial vehicles that are beyond the size to fit the road. And so that's one of my concerns. The other is that I was going down to visit with the Birches. And so I took the old 93 and lo and behold, there's a herd of about 150 elk. They're caught in the marshland between the old 93 and the new 93. They would try to go one way, stop. The herd looked around, they go back the other way. Back and forth, trying to get out of that marshland. And as far as the marshlands, if you look around, you see nothing but cattails that are on both sides of the highway. That is a water drainage source, and it is the water that we need in our homes. So, and then I see you have allowed 300 feet wide for a wildlife corridor. Are you going to put up signs to tell the elk which way to go? I leave it at that.
Thank you. Additional public comment? Yes, sir.
My name is Mike Rada and I live just south of the pit there. And I just wanted to point out the obvious thing that we all need gravel and we all use gravel. And it'd be my wish that you approve the pit today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Additional public comment from folks here in the courthouse? Going once, going twice. Let's go online. Is there anyone online or on the phone who would like to comment? If you're online, please use the raise hand function and we will call on you in the order in which you raise your hand. Is there anyone on the phone? In which case you can just unmute yourself. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Stefan Fort. You just heard my wife, Tori. I just have one quick question for the planning office. So Jenny did a pretty good job at finally digging into the history of this pit and pulling up information about the zoning process of it. There's one element that's completely missing though, and that nobody really mentioned, is the fact that the public and this board, the Board of County Commissioners, was completely left out through the entire history of this pit. Why? That is my question. Why? You can sense the feeling of injustice in the entire neighborhood here, that today we're finally asked about this pit and consulted to increase it even more, even though in 93, 99, 2009, public and the Board of County Commissioners should have been included in these decisions. It was not the case. I would like to have an answer. We will all would like to have an answer. Just do not understand. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else online or on the phone who would like to comment? Anyone online or on the phone who would like to comment who is not previously? Okay. With that, we will close the public hearing and open it up to questions or comments from the Planning and Zoning Commission. Tyler.
This is for Tori Fort.
Tori, come on up, please.
Hello. Hi. I am curious. You have been fairly prolific, it sounds like, in this effort to oppose this variance, which I can understand and appreciate. From what I can tell, you purchased your property in August, July of last year. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Can you tell me what steps you went through to, it sounds like you've gone to a lot of lengths now. Did you take those steps before you purchased the property?
Well,
I guess just walk me through what you guys did before you purchased the property, understanding that there was a gravel pit there.
Well, we have a zoning in place, which we got when we purchased the property. So we did the due diligence of seeing what the zoning was like. And the zoning precluded industrial operations. So with the current gravel pit that was there, and it was a non-conforming use, which we understood at the time was, we didn't go through the things that we went through that we have gone through now to understand the illegality of it now. But at the time, we realized that it would not grow in size. So that's why we purchased our property. Because the rest of that neighborhood is fantastic. It is a beautiful neighborhood. We're not in an area that's not taken care of. People have great pride. I've gotten to know all the neighbors actually through this process. They are people who have been there from up to 60 years to, yes, people in another family that moved in just a couple of years prior to myself. So it's not just me who moved in next to a gravel pit. There's other people who understood that it was supposed to be restricted in size. And when you restrict something in size, it has a shorter lifetime than what we're learning about now, which is 2045 or 2070, I don't know. So that's why we purchased it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Ms. Fort. Additional questions? Shane. Yeah.
This is for Mr. Kappas. I don't know if you mind coming up here. And this, I guess, is based more on the condition of the water. So do you have wells that you're pumping out of for water service at the site now?
Yes, we do.
Do you have a sense of how much water you're using?
We use, is this on?
You have to speak close to the mic.
Close to it?
There we
There
go.
we go.
Now we're talking.
Okay.
The water comes out, we have 3 wells and they're the 35 GPM size wells. So we don't use, the consumptive use of that is not very large. We wash the gravel, but we're able to wash the gravel to get the volumes by pumping into ponds, reusing the water, and then it circulates back down through.
And then do you have monitoring wells on site?
For this site, we do not have monitoring wells because we're not mining in the groundwater. That would be a requirement if we were to go down in the groundwater. Now we are restricting ourselves and the DEQ will restrict us. We will not go into groundwater.
Okay, so DEQ is not requiring you to have monitoring wells so that you know the depth of the water?
Well, we know the depth of the water.
Okay.
But we don't have monitoring wells like you would in a pit where you were actually mining in the water.
Okay.
And so that's what sets the depth for which we can't go below.
All right. And with your wells, are you experiencing lower flows?
We are not. Our wells are lower than the neighborhood's wells as far as the aquifer. So we believe the wells are pumping out of the Bitterroot aquifer instead of the aquifer that the neighborhood has on the side of the mountain.
That's all I have
Thank
right
you,
now.
Mr. Kappas. While you're still up here, avoid you having to sit down again. We've heard some comment about the price of material and whether it really does vary. I guess as far as the end user goes, if it varies depending on how far removed they are from the pit. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think to some extent where the questioning is going is what I've experienced with some utilities, like let's take electrical utility that might see a decrease in its taxes, but we as the end users don't necessarily see any decrease in our ultimate tax bills. So in a case like that, and I think the implication here would be that any cost savings are going to you as the owner of the property and not to the end user.
So when I talk about the price of the gravel we set based on what the current price around the community is. I mean, it has to stay. There are smaller pits. When I'm talking about the price to deliver that gravel, that's not a price that we're paying. That would be for the customer hiring that haul truck and paying that haul truck to haul it the extra distance. So whether you're, and gravel's very heavy, and as we all know, in anything we have to have delivered, the further it has to be delivered and the heavier it is, the more expensive it is for those who are having it delivered. So it is the end user or the end project person that is paying for that additional cost. That has nothing to do with us as a company.
Okay, thank you. Josh.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to see if I could ask Mr. Kappas some questions.
Mr. Kappas.
Thanks. And first, I want to say I appreciate your very engaging presentation, and your manner of speaking was really good. I could hang with it. So even as I say that, excuse me if I ask some review questions. You described quite articulately some pretty negative consequences for people who live near a gravel pit. Could you say a few of those again, the ones that are really powerful?
Well, I'll just tell you. So this is the 5th of these cases that I'm currently litigating. So I have experts in all of my other cases who are scientists, PhDs, hydrogeologists who are producing the expert testimony in court to litigate these issues. That's where my information comes from. So what we have, and obviously that's not the issue here because we're not presenting expert testimony. But when you're in front of the Montana DEQ on an appeal process of one of these mines, there is an actual hearing process through the sort of establishment of that administrative record, which allows you to introduce that testimony. So what we have learned through this process is that when you remove gravel or overburden to get at the gravel, essentially, you're exposing more transmissive soils. So those are the gravel itself has greater porosity, right? It's more porous material than the soil that's on top of it, right? And soil and plants act as a filter for that water before it would go into shallow groundwater. And when you remove those surfaces as inherently and fundamentally a part of this process, the transmissivity of water increases. The faster it will transmit through essentially the aquifer systems. And so what is happening is that you're having a greater and expedited increase in infiltration. So chemicals that are used on site, that are created on site, whether contained in dust, fuel that's stored on site, any of the related chemicals that are used in asphalt production. So those include heavy hydrocarbons. That's the carcinogenic dust that's created, that's regulated under the Clean Air Act. Those materials are all settling on the site and are then transmitting into the groundwater table. So that is then transmitting outwards, depending on what the transmissivity is. And we'd have to have somebody actually study that, which I suggest has not happened here. I've not seen a hydrogeologic report for this site. That's something that I did not see in the record, which would be so transmissivity is measured in an actual value that can be shown, which is how fast will water transmit in a lateral direction and in a vertical gradient direction. I've not seen that anywhere for this site. And I heard Mr. Kappas say that he knows what the groundwater table is, but I have not seen that anywhere also in the record before this. And so it's not as simple, at least from a water quality perspective, of saying, are we going to mine into the ground, which I think is an oversimplification that's being made here, because those transmissive soils, you can have a distance of 20 or 25 feet, 30 feet, and still have chemicals being transmitted into groundwater vertically and then going outwards in a horizontal path, depending on the groundwater flow at the site. And that's different at each specific site that we're looking at, which is why we actually have to have scientists answer these questions. So groundwater contamination is well documented. And that includes heavy hydrocarbons that are stored on site from fuels and chemicals used in the production. That also includes carcinogenic air quality materials that are also created from the actual use of asphalt production, and also from dust that's created carrying those hydrocarbons that are exposed on the site. So those are some of the primary ones that we're concerned about from a public health standpoint. And as I said, unfortunately, those are not regulated by DEQ. And so there is nobody that's looking at these things, which is why zoning really is the only step that these people have.
Another question. I think I want to just make sure I heard this right. The current pit can go till 2045 or potentially longer if they ask DEQ, or if the gravel's not played out and they say the construction environment has slowed, so they need to extend their amount of time. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's borne out by the facts directly before this commission, which is that it was till 2020 and 2009 when the county attorney Hested looked at this. He said, let's let this thing die. It's almost done in 2020, but then they went and reapplied. And in 2015, when Western came in, we reapplied, we extended that for 25 more years. And as you heard them say today, there is no promise. They are not willing to make a promise to a date certain that this thing will end. And so it's totally feasible, to your question, that we get to 2044 and we say, actually, we need another 30 years. And I'm just going to guess that Missoula County doesn't stop growing in 30 years. And so we're then at a point where we might expand again, and we could expand again. And we just essentially have a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So, and all of what you just described could very well happen, regardless if this zoning variance happens or not. Is that correct?
That's incorrect. So the zoning variance is the thing that can stop it. So DEQ is not looking at these issues that we're here considering today. And so they are going to rubber stamp this under current state law. And so you are the body that has the power to stop this, and zoning is the mechanism by which you can legally stop it.
So to be clear, I'm not talking about the zoning variance on the 80 acres or 70 acres to the south, but the current pit. The current pit could stay in operation to 2045 or beyond, continuing to do all the bad stuff you just described. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. But scope and nature is different, obviously. Yeah. You're talking about 75 versus 150 acres. So yeah, but in current site, and that's totally
I guess,
feasible.
and again, excuse me for getting some of this wrong, because what I feel like I'm hearing from both proponents and opponents are things like, we need gravel right now. And things like, we got to get this horrible carcinogenic dust out of our lives right now. My kids are in danger today. I totally hear that. It's very, very compelling. And all that continues regardless of the issue before us today. And again, if I got it wrong, I apologize. If I understand it correctly, we're deciding about a zoning variance on the additional 70 acres has not yet been touched. And the land that's being worked right now at this moment can continue to be worked as it is for the next 45 years, no matter what we say, no matter what we do. These giant trucks are going to endanger your children's lives. Dust is going to fly. It's going to be terrible, no matter what we do. So I guess I'm wondering, why not attempt to stop the gravel pit from existing? Like, given that there's this history that is really murky and kind of a mess, but it isn't what we can do. Well, it sounds to me like, and if I'm getting it wrong, again, I apologize, like there would be the best thing for the neighbors is for the gravel pit to go away tomorrow. Right? But it doesn't feel like that is up to us at this moment. What we're talking about is what's going to happen in the next 45 years. And again, if I get it wrong, it sounds like the Western folks are going to slowly decommission the old pit as they begin to mine in the new pit. And maybe there's a way we can make it such that the actual amount of actively mined ground doesn't increase, and they take mitigation measures that could help the neighbors right now. Because if they don't do anything, they just keep mining, keep going straight ahead for the next 45 or next 25 years, it's going to be terrible for the neighbors. So I'm trying to find a path here where it's actually better for the neighbors. And just saying no to the expansion isn't going to be better for the neighbors. Truthfully, we're not going to be here. The kids whose lives are so negatively affected will be gone and coming back with their grandkids. You see where I'm headed with this?
I do. And I think I have at least a decent response for you, which is step one in any situation like this has to be to stop the bleeding or don't make it worse, right? So what you're asking about is the cumulative effect of adding something new to what is already bad. And so step one has to be, don't make the problem worse. Don't make this thing worse than it already is, because any rationalization of this in which you're making the problem worse doesn't address any of the very real concerns that have been raised. So step one has to be, don't make the problem worse. Step two for my clients, you're correct. So when I started to look at this, that had to be from my strategy perspective, is step one is stop the use variance. Step two is we're going to challenge the underlying case in court. So that's a totally separate process under the Uniform Declaratory Judgment Act, where we're going to ask a court to invalidate the illegal certificate of zoning compliance that was established here back starting in 1993. That will be fought. We're going to have a big, long litigation about this. That'll probably go to the Montana Supreme Court. Tons of money will be spent arguing about that issue, and maybe one day we'll get an answer. Somebody will win and somebody will lose. That's how litigation works. But this is a public process in which you guys have the power to not make this worse. And that's the best thing that you can do here today.
So I wonder if in not making it worse, we could get the company to take some active measures to mitigate some of the impacts that you very articulately described. Are there things we could get them to do now that would make life better for the neighbors?
We'd like to see let's see an advanced hydrologic analysis of shallow groundwater in the area. Let's see an analysis of dust and airflow at the surface level where people are breathing it. Let's see a promise about how many trucks are going to come in and out an hour. Let's see a promise of a date certain that this is going to end. Those are things that you guys don't have before you to consider. Those are relevant factors that would go into all of the considerations that you should be making, and it's just not here. So you
And-
have to deny this today.
So if they were to stay mining as they are, we have no leverage to make them do any of those things. If I understand it right, we can condition approval and force them to do some of those things and maybe other things, given I'm not a scientist. But if we are just to say, no, they get to keep doing exactly what they're doing. We have no leverage. It feels like this crazy spot where our leverage is by saying yes and then conditioning that yes. And again, I'm just asking here. I'm not making any declarations.
No, and I get where you're coming from, and you're not wrong that you have authority to make conditions because of the application that's before you, by virtue of the process.
Exactly.
And I would just beg the question of why these conditions weren't imposed in the first place on the site.
I have no idea. I was not here.
Understand. But that is obviously the elephant in the room here, is that we're talking about something that went from something that was the size of this room to something that's now taking up a half, 80 acres of land. And there has been no mitigation that's ever been implemented. And so now all you can do is talk about mitigation going forward on the additional cumulative impact, right? The additional cumulative impact of adding more pollution, adding more nuisance to a neighborhood that's specifically zoned, excluding that, where there was also a non-growth of the non-compliance was in the zoning regulations, where it says no non-conforming uses will be allowed to grow here. And that's exactly what's happened. And that's exactly what we're talking about doing now. So
all I'm going to say is it's not the elephant in the room, which is like the big hidden thing that we're not acknowledging. I feel like we're totally acknowledging it. And I have no rationalization for it. It wasn't here. Can't explain it. And yet here we are with this gravel pit next to a neighborhood that's spewing and doing all this terrible stuff and making life crappy for the neighbors. No argument. I wouldn't want to live there myself. Is there something we can do actively right now to make life better for the neighbors? And is it true that the way to get to that, doing something right for the neighbors, is strangely by saying yes and then conditioning that yes? Because if we say no, then everything just
Sir, please sit down, sir, and others in the audience. We're going to
please don't mistake my passion for. I'm just asking. And
well, no, and the answer to your question, when you just distill down what you're saying, which is what can you do, right? What can you? Well, so then the question is, you're balancing. Is mitigating conditions on the growth of this site better for the community than denying it? That's the question that you're really asking.
And I'm openly asking. I'm openly saying. Okay, I don't know which way I'm going to vote. This is wide open. This is thinking in public here. It might be. What if we're to say, hell no, the whole thing was specious. It's terrible. We're just saying no right now. They just continue on as they have been going for 20, 30, could be 40 years. And that's terrible for the neighborhood. If we were to say, yes, and you're going to do some of the analysis you asked for, and they're going to take other measures, it could actually be better for the neighborhood.
Okay, I will agree with you that hypothetically that could be true. But there is nothing in the mitigating report that we saw here today that would lead to that conclusion. So if they said, yes, we're going to be done in 5 years, I would absolutely advise my client that that is a good deal. We should drop our objection to this process because in 5 years they're going to be done, and that's how long it's going to take us to litigate this thing anyway. So yeah, that's a good deal. But saying, oh yeah, let's agree to, they won't even agree to a date in the first place. So
well, we're not done negotiating.
Okay. So I'd say, if we're going to start, we need to be talking about a very short time frame, because you're talking about public health risks. So like people don't, you don't have forever to inhale carcinogenic dust before you develop cancer. So these are things that have to happen quickly. All right. Groundwater, once it's polluted, you can't take the ink out of the milk. That is something that has happened then. So, there is a hypothetical world in which you're right, in which case the best case scenario is some sort of very stringent conditions, but we haven't seen any of those proposed, and I'm just going to guess that they're not going to agree to it. So,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, I mean, to me, the very best thing that you can do is deny this variance. That's the best thing for the community, undisputably. And then you let us fight about the illegality of the underlying site in court.
So, man, you're super compelling, but I'm not quite sold, because if we just say no, everything just continues on as it is, which is crappy. So I wonder, I'm almost done.
Okay.
And I promise I'll shut up for a while. Y'all will be so grateful.
And I bet we even have a chance to answer or ask the applicant some of those very
Correct.
questions.
I'm just wondering if you and the applicant were to go off somewhere, not here today, it's too intense, it's too time constrained, and talk about this a little bit, because maybe there's a way we say yes and the and are some of the very reasonable, very powerful, sounds like very smart things you're talking about. Because if we just say no, life just continues on as it is, which is obviously not good for the neighborhood. And I strongly suggest we try not to figure it out here today, but have you guys go off and talk about it and see if you can come up with some things that you agree on.
I'm all for it. You know, if you guys wanted to ask us to go to mediation, you know, that's something that I think usually does have a good possibility. And I always encourage
Sounds appealing.
compromise. And I would encourage that here. I'm just going to guess that when they come back up here, the conditions that we're asking for are not going to be favorable. They're not going to be things that the company is willing to agree to. And I'd be happy to be
Well,
proven
then they're
otherwise.
unfortunately closing a door too soon.
I'll look
And
forward.
thank you for this back and forth. I appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Sounds like the commissioner's hourglass is half full. So, and public comment is done, sir. The public hearing is closed. So additional questions, Tyler?
Sorry, Graham, can you? And I don't know if you have the legal answer for this or just your, your opinion, but I think the concept that an non-conforming use can't grow when it's a gravel pit is kind of nebulous to me. Like, clearly you're not going to, like, every stone you unturn is growing. At what point they're staying within the boundaries of the parcel that they had, is my understanding, when the zoning district was passed. Are you suggesting that they can't dig any deeper, they can't dig any wider, they just can't dig? Because that seems to defeat the purpose of a non-conforming use.
Yeah, so I would say that the question revolves around the nature and the scope of what we're doing. And that's what we've seen the Montana Supreme Court say. And so if we look at the case in Citizens, from the and I'm not having the case side, but the Flathead Lake water bottling plant and the zoning district that was initiated by the citizens in that case, what the court actually said was that the bottling plant got to stay, but they could only bottle water up to the actual volume that they were doing at that time, that they couldn't grow that operation to bottle more bottles beyond that which was occurring at the date that the zoning went into effect. And so that's a case where you have a plant that's a fixed plant in a building that's inside that wasn't going to grow. They were just going to process more materials, which would have caused increased truck traffic and stuff like that. But the actual size of the actual ground disturbance wasn't going to change at all. And so what we're looking at is the nature and the scope of what existed at the time that the zoning went into effect. And so Jenny had some slides that we had procured that are photographs that showed a very small disturbance at the time that, well, I guess there wasn't a photo directly from 1976, but that was from the 1960s. And so that's the best that we have. Mr. Hendrickson, I guess, said and attested to a 5-acre development at the time, so that's the fixed site. It's not the depth of mining, it's the nature of the disturbance. So how far linearly it went on each side and how much actual work was being done. So if we really wanted to drill down, and it would be how many cubic yards of gravel was he moving at that time that this went into effect? How many trucks were being used? How much were their commercial gross sales at the time? Those are the questions that the court is going to ask.
Okay, one follow-up question. That is actually really helpful. So what you're suggesting is they wouldn't be able to just dig deeper forever and ever and ever into the groundwater, because it sounded to me like there's nothing preventing them from digging into the groundwater except revising their DEQ permit.
Fair, yeah. The zoning.
Other than zoning. My next question, I guess, would be, my last question actually for you is, you talked about environmental degradation and how this is detrimental, obviously, to the environment, but then you talk about we should just move this somewhere else. How is that not just moving the environmental degradation somewhere else?
Well, it would be, but you'd be moving it somewhere that didn't have zoning, which is the question that you're to consider. And so obviously, when you go and do this in a place where there's not zoning, then there is no analysis like this for you all to consider. And so that's where I would be before the Board of Environmental Review with these same people if we weren't here, and would be arguing about those issues in a different venue. So it's essentially your jurisdictional authority to look at an issue is related to zoning. But if we weren't in a zoned area, we'd be fighting about this in a different venue. And essentially, you know, I think ultimately what we're going to have to do is challenge the entire constitutionality of HB 599, which was the law that stripped DEQ's authority to look at these issues in the first place. And so it's not that those issues aren't relevant and that we're saying, let's just kick the can to somebody else's backyard. It's that it would be a different venue for us to fight about it. A different legal mechanism too.
So just following up on something that Tyler started with, as far as the non-conforming use and the use that was in effect when zoning was adopted for this area. So I think I heard you or your colleague mention 160 acre parcel. Did I hear that erroneously?
Somebody said that, yeah.
Okay, so I guess the question would be, and maybe I need to have John come up here and speak to this in a second. Well, maybe John, and since John said it, maybe he is the appropriate person.
I can just tell you that the parcel size is irrelevant from a legal perspective, if that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is if the gravel mining operation, the footprint of it was smaller than 160 acres, but it's part of a larger 160 acre tract, to what extent acreage wise or size wise geographically is the non-conformance? Does it extend out to the entire parcel somehow, or is it just the footprint of the non-conformity?
Well, and that's kind of the same question that Tyler got asked about, which is the nature and the scope of the non-conforming use at the time that the zoning went into effect. And so, like in the example of the bottling plant, it was the amount of commercial activity that was happening at the time. So exactly the questions that are going to become relevant is, what was the volume that was being moved? What was the size of the land disturbance at that time? What was the gross income of the company as it existed at that date? Just like in the cases that involve restaurants and non-conforming uses, this board has asked, how many tables were there at the time that the restaurant was developed? So an increase in tables is an increase in scope. And so that's really what you're talking about. There is no right to expand indefinitely out to the parcel boundaries, if that's what you're asking.
Thanks. Mr. Kappas, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or no? Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kappas. This is tough to keep straight here, sorry.
Gentleman from Western, then I won't get the name wrong. Just wondering if you are willing to speak with the folks from the Carlton Trust about mitigation measures, additional mitigation measures you could take for the benefit of the neighborhood. Not here and now, it's too much for right here and now, but to step away and have a conversation, because that may be, I'm going to stress the might be a path forward here. Kind of where I'm headed is that our way to make things better for the neighbors now is to condition an approval. Are you willing to go off, talk with them about additional mitigation measures that would actually make things better for the neighbors?
Well, I think our actions in this process have showed that we are. I mean, we had a public meeting in November to meet with the neighborhood, hear their concerns. We've heard their concerns over the time frame to establish mitigation. So if there's additional mitigation that we can agree to that will help the neighborhood, we would have no problem.
So just to be clear, you're saying you would go meet with the folks from the Carlton Trust and have conversations leading towards some additional mitigation measures that you could all agree to, because we could enforce those. We could condition an approval and enforce those. If we, without an approval, we have no leverage to enforce any new behavior. That's where I'm headed. So if you're open to that, I would love to see you all go do that. I'm only a voice of 1 of 5 here. Are you saying yes?
Yeah, we'd be willing to talk to them.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Shane.
Dave, yeah, thanks, Dave. And since you're up here, I thought I would just lead in because I think Mr. Koppas, brings up a valid point, and that's kind of where I was going. Is that groundwater makes me a little nervous, and when you're digging into that, you are potentially impacting those neighbors. And if we could, or if you could, and I don't know if you're willing to do this, evaluate, what that groundwater is doing, and if you are digging into the existing material, what's the long-term impact to the neighbors as far as the groundwater goes? And I think that would make me feel more comfortable trying to make a decision, because right now I just don't have enough information to say, I'm really comfortable with you moving forward, knowing that you potentially are impacting your neighbors.
And that's why, one of the mitigations of we put out there is we will not dig into the groundwater. And we are right now, our only impact to the water is pumping for the wells we have. As far as we are required by DEQ to have containment for all of our fuel and to deal with stormwater so that it does not impact the groundwater. But if there's additional things we could do or additional studies we could do to make sure that we are not impacting the groundwater, we'd be open to that for certain.
Shane, do you have some, if not here in the future, would you have some specific ideas what that analysis might look like?
I certainly, I could look into it, but I would put it on Western to provide that information to make us feel a little bit better too, and the neighbors, frankly. I mean, if I lived there and I was concerned about groundwater, that's something that I would really want to know.
Is that the same as a transmissivity report? That groundwater analysis? Okay.
Oh. Okay. Thank you. Come on up, sir.
Hi, Mike Smith, WGM. I just wanted to address, so for the water quality and quantity, I would assume, a couple of things I just wanted to touch on. There was a question of how do we know where the groundwater is? John mentioned that we do have three wells on site. There's clearly water levels in those wells, so it's a direct measurement of where the water is on those. And there was also a lot of wells in the area and identifying the aquifers that he talked about too. But we could certainly, it is possible to, in the past, the DEQ, as Mr. Koppas has noted, that the DEQ has changed some of the requirements so that the applicant does not have to make a full groundwater investigation on many of their sites. So what we could do is just that, look at water quality and water quantity as well as for all options out there. I'm not sure if that answers kind of everything that you're looking for, but
I think what you are hearing is that some additional groundwater analysis would be requested of this board. Shane, go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree, Dave. And I think just reading our comments, you've got neighbors that are saying my well is drying up. And I don't know if that's a result of you guys pumping a lot of water out, because a wash plant, you guys are going to burn through a lot of water. And I don't know, I just don't know enough about your, I just don't know enough about your operation.
I can directly address that for sure, that the least consumptive use for anything there is going to be the mine. Residences there are going to be much more consumptive, and even 10 times more consumptive than the residences is going to be agricultural. So if there's, center pivot irrigators up there, that's where the volumes that the mine is currently using is not, and not being in the same aquifer, they're not impacting the things. But you need a survey or an investigation to prove that.
Right, and that you're telling me that, but I have nothing that shows me that. And so if you can do that, that would help us.
We also have people telling you that carcinogenic dust is floating around. We don't have proof of that either.
But I didn't ask you about carcinogenic dust.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Before you sit down, sir, Josh.
I just want to make sure I heard this right. 3 35 gallons per minute wells, and water's going into a pond, and you're recycling that water?
Yeah, the 35 gallon per minute reference is to the permitted water right uses of that. They cannot legally extract more than 35 gallons per minute every minute, every day.
Yeah, yeah.
For
And that- and,
perpetuity, and we are way below.
And that's, I'm say from coming from an agricultural background, that's not a tremendous amount of water. And that's
typical-
going into a well and then being recycled.
Yeah,
And sorry, into a pond.
Well, it goes into the pond, and then it's within the pond, it's recycled several times too. They extract from the pond and
I just
wash
want
it
to
with
make sure I
recycled.
heard it right.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so that they'll extract some from the ground, use it several times, and then it eventually makes its way back to the same well.
Okay.
I have a question about aquifers. Then are we talking about two different aquifers or water sources? Because
That's what we believe right now, but to Shane's point, we can prove that with a.
okay, because I don't even have a concept of the aquifers that the 35-gallon wells are versus the aquifers that the neighborhood is tapping into, and as the neighborhood grows, are neighbors reducing their wells just because of growth to that particular aquifer? And I don't, not clear on that.
If you're asking, is more houses affecting the uses up there? I would say for sure. I mean, there's a limited amount of water. I would argue that's probably if there's agriculture close, and it also depends on upgrading, downgrading, a different aquifer, same aquifer, things like that.
But we could get that information, I guess, is what Tyler and Shane were asking, right?
That is what we're asking the applicant to provide a groundwater investigation.
Yeah, and those, that's unfortunately, it's not something that I can go to a book and read, but obviously there's going to be some background research done for that.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I have a question or two. So I believe these might have been posed by Mr. Sherman earlier. Maybe for Jenny. And the question went something like this: what ensures that scenario 2 that's offered by the applicant will actually come to pass and will not result in something else other than what's being proposed today?
Thank you. Yes. So that is going to be reflected in the recommended condition number 1 under the legal descriptions of the properties that these conditions apply to. And it states that the development agreement shall include the following provisions, which cannot be revised or deleted without Missoula County, your approval, and allows for county enforcement. And the DEQ permit has to be revised to reflect this. The first part of this, however, states that the applicant has to file a development agreement binding on Western Materials as well as future lot purchasers. So this will show up with a title search or any kind of transfer of ownership, that these conditions apply on this property and are enforceable by the county through that provision in part 1 that I read to you about. You have the authority to hear and take action if there is non-compliance.
Okay. And again, it's not as though, well, correct me if I'm wrong, as with any case of compliance, it's going to be something that's typically reported to us. We are not going to be out inspecting years later the level of compliance, or are we?
I think there's not a hard and fast answer to that. I mean, at times we have been out and seen violations. Most often they do come as citizen complaint. And we have a list that we go through and try to manage those enforcement cases. But it can also come from observation or site visit as well, or future request for a permit on the site.
Okay, moving on to a second question, something along the lines of why should these folks who are in this Part 1 zoning district be penalized for being in a Part 1 zoning district? So I guess another way to put it is, I guess a question for you to begin with: why has Missoula County moved away from Part 1 zoning to Part 2 zoning? And what is the relevance, I guess, Jenny, do you see in terms of the case at hand here?
The relevance is that the district, the kind of zoning that they're in right now allows a use variance. The Part 1 zoning does. Part 1 zoning is older, and it was what was used typically back in the 50s, 60s, sometimes 70s.
So maybe here's the question. Why did we do away with use variances in Part 2? Did we see this as a bad thing, and that that there should not be that latitude or flexibility in determining whether a use variance is granted or not, and that it should be more static?
I mean, that seems like a reasonable, I don't know the answer for sure, but that seems certainly like a reasonable conclusion, that use variances. So what we do now really are special exceptions, and Part 1 zoning doesn't have that tool, and special exceptions in Part 2 zoning lets you take a look at the specifics of the situation and determine if it can fit.
So in the case at hand, would what is being proposed here today fall under the category of a special exception or not? And I guess where I'm going with this is, if we have the latitude to basically in our decision mimic Part 2 zoning and not grant the zoning variance or include any mitigations and simply deny the request, why would we not do so if we've already determined over time that allowing use variances is a bad thing, and we would not in Part 2 zoning today allow such a thing?
Beyond the fact that that the state law doesn't prohibit and conversely authorizes use variances in Part 1, and the criteria are different for variances than they are for special exceptions. Part 1 zones rarely, if ever, in Missoula County, I don't know that I've seen a single one that has special exceptions. And so utilizing the framework that is in Part 1, the option, if you want to do something other than the often few things listed as permitted, is use variance. And as John has continued to educate me over the years, that the zoning has to be flexible enough to take a look, not necessarily approve, but take a look at are deviations, whether it's through variance or special exception, appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Additional questions? Tyler.
I've got one for Jenny. So, and I don't know if you'll have the answer to this, so feel free to phone a friend, I guess. But I honestly, like, this hasn't really been brought up, but I just personally have a concern over the bond amount, which seems insufficient to me for reclamation in 20 or potentially 50 years. Is that something that we can put in the forget whatever you're calling this agreement.
The conditions of approval.
The conditions of approval, whatever agreement this is. And can we revisit that to evaluate the scope of, because I guess from my perspective, what we heard John Kappas say was they don't want to put a time frame on, like, this is the end of this mine, because we don't know what economic conditions will do. Right. Is there a way for us to evaluate over time in periodic increments what the disturbance is and require some kind of bonding to reclaim that if it were to end? In addition, because again, like, I don't think a $330,000, which is, if memory serves me, what their bond was, is going to cover reclamation in 2045.
Bonding and reclamation fall entirely under the DEQ air quality or open cut mining permit.
And I guess I get that, but I mean, like, can the county separately from that, or utilizing some other process, do something to ensure that we're not in a situation sort of not to. Oh,
looks like maybe John has.
Looks like
John,
a friend is joining.
Mr. Kappas, come on up.
So that's one of the reasons in our DEQ permit, we won't be able to say this pit will go on forever. We will have to set a date. And that's why then the DEQ allows that to be extended. But part of that process is so that they can catch up on the bonding. So our bonding right now, I believe for reclamation is $430,000, if I'm remembering right. In 2045, that bond will be calculated based on current costs. And so that's how the DEQ keeps up with the changing costs and bonds.
Tyler? And I can definitely appreciate that. I think my concern is history has not necessarily proven, and this may be not true for gravel pits, but certainly, you know, at the Bonner site, Missoula County has spent a bunch of money reclaiming and basically doing what the Anaconda Company and Atlantic Richfield and all these other companies didn't do, even though we had laws in place to do that. So what I'm suggesting, I guess, and would you be amenable to, not that you have to answer right now, but maybe this can be part of your discussion, is evaluating that on a more periodic basis than once every 25 or 30 years, because.
And that's what, you know, we're at 2045 now, the reclamation. We wouldn't set that out for 50 more years. So we would be on we'll be on a more current rotation. So when I said we don't want to set a date certain in our DEQ, we will set a date so that bonding gets reevaluated. But what we're trying to do is not have a date set that would end the mine's life while it still had gravel resources available. But we would be in the process of keeping that bond up to date.
Shane, go ahead.
And just on that same topic, you can also reclaim as you're going too. It's not like you have to reclaim the entire site all at once at the very end. As you're mining and mining is complete in a location, you could reclaim portions.
Well, the way we mitigated some of the concerns on this site, that's going to make it very difficult for us to do, because we aren't going to move our processing equipment as we extract. So our processing equipment and our plants are going to stay in the current pit, and we're going just to extract the material from the new expansion. And so all of our stockpiles and our processing will be on the current pit floor. So that's why we can't move along and reclaim, is because we're not going to move our plants into the new area.
Go ahead, Josh.
So are you saying the gear it takes to do the processing would take up the entirety of the space that you used to extract from? Okay, I'll try it another way. Sorry about that. So we got the current pit that you're on right now. Come piggybacking off of what Shane said. Could you remediate? Could you restore? Could you do restoration as you go? And that's what Shane asked. And you were saying, no, we can't do that restoration because we still have all our gear there, which sounds to me like like a spatial thing. Like you can't restore where you've been digging because now you have all the processing gear there. And I'm wondering if that processing gear takes up the entirety of the space. Could you do some restoration and still leave space for the processing gear?
We'll
reclaim. That's the right word.
We're going to reclaim that north head wall that currently is there. And then we would look at as much as we could reclaim. So yes, if we're not utilizing the whole pit, but with the processing, there might be some acreage we could reclaim, and we would reclaim that. There will be an incentive for us to reclaim as much as we can, because then we won't have to bond to have that portion open because we'll have reclaimed it. So
yeah, it also might help with the dust and all the rest of it too.
Shane, did you have anything follow up there? Mr. Smith, are you wanting to add on to your client?
Yeah, I'm just going to help clarify for you, Commissioner Zlotnick. With the equipment where it is, as John noted, the north portion that will be reclaimed in the plans that Jenny showed as part of the mitigation, that will certainly be reclaimed. With the equipment where it is, as we move forward westward, we can't reclaim in between where the material is and where we're operating, because we'd essentially be driving over what's reclaimed. And according to the DEQ, any kind of disturbance, whether you're parking trucks there or storing materials, it's part of the pit and they won't release it as a reclaimed part. Does that help a little bit? And I guess the only other thing that I'll add for Tyler, there is the potential to, or let's put it this way, anytime anything not just the end of the permit, but anytime anything changes that requires notification of the DEQ, essentially, whether it be they're going to trying to think of a good example. If they wanted to add concrete storage, if for that, then they would have to then revisit any kind of applications that requires an update of the bond. So it's not just the end of the permit, and you can go in prior to the end of the permit and just do the bond if we wanted, which would definitely happen if there's reclamation activities. So if we release a certain portion of the north, it'll be updated at that point, and every time anything's gone on there. So I think it's absolutely before 2045. It will likely be, but it could also be on a schedule if that's amenable. I don't want to promise for Western.
Tyler and then Josh.
I'm actually going to throw out a statement, and if I'm lucky, it'll be my last one. So I think one of the concerns that I've heard today that resonates is state law keeps changing, and DEQ what is true today may not be true tomorrow, and it doesn't seem to be changing in a path of making it more restrictive. Yes. And so I think what I maybe am suggesting is that as part of this agreement, and this is maybe why I said this to Jenny too, because I don't know that Missoula County has the capacity to enforce such an agreement. So I'm not sure, I might be asking the impossible, but putting some sideboards on that are actually enforceable independent of state law is kind of what I'm suggesting.
I don't think I could have a lawyer come up and talk to the legality points, but I can speak to some of the teeth, so that House Bill 599 took out of the DEQ process is many of those are some of those mitigation efforts that we're asking to put back in. And I have verified with the DEQ that while, for instance, operating hours is a great example, I'm not required to tell the DEQ what my operating hours are. So therefore they cannot enforce what my operating hours are. But if I tell them what my operating hours are and it is in the permit, they now can and will enforce that. So we are introducing some of those, at least operational guidelines, to be enforceable. And I'll just note that the statutory Montana MCA or our laws written into the Open Cut Mining Act is a finable of $100 to $1,000 per day for an offense. So it's in the operator's best interest to get that taken care of if it is noted to their attention.
Josh.
So I heard what you said, Mr. Smith, about not being able to reclaim land that you're then going to drive over.
Yes, sir.
So what if you were to begin mining at the far western edge of the new land, mine a strip, reclaim it, and then move from west to east as opposed to east to west? So could you then reclaim as you go?
I'm going to defer to John or one of those guys. That's my understanding of the way that, if I'm hearing you right, I mean, essentially we've got a hill, right? We've got the operating down here, and this is the hill we're moving west. In order to get the material to where we're processing it, we're going to basically shave away at that hill. So I'm not sure if you're suggesting we go over the hill.
So the topography makes what I'm talking about impossible.
Oh, yeah. I guess
if it was,
unless you were able to just chunk that whole 30 acres at once, and then, but that'd be impossible. I mean, you can't just process that much. Am I close with that, John?
John, if you have anything to add, come on up. If not, that's fine. But, okay.
You're good?
All right. I think we're good for now. Additional comments or questions from the board? So a few things that I'm hearing are, one, that we have a request for a more robust, or maybe not more robust, a groundwater investigation. Also, some additional conversation about what the mechanism would be for a more periodic recalculation of the bonding requirements that would be enforceable. Also for the applicant and the Yeah, the Kappas Caucus team, the Carlton Protection Trust and the applicant to get together and have some additional conversations as to whether or not some meeting of the minds might be had. What am I missing here,
Oh,
folks?
with that meeting of the minds, what I was pushing on there toward were additional mitigation measures that would address some of the deleterious consequences of gravel mining that Graham so articulately described. And what I was hoping for was that the two parties could get together, agree on what those measures would be, so that we could actually make things better for neighbors now. And this is not me saying, oh, I don't understand that we need gravel. I get that we need gravel. We're set at this pit for till 2045 or beyond. This isn't about is gravel production going to end tomorrow. It's not. It's going to go on for the next 20 plus years, as could this horrible effects for the neighborhood. It seems like we can make things better for the neighbors by offering a very heavily conditioned yes. And what I'd like to see, if it's possible, is you guys to get together and determine what those conditions could be. And if you can't agree, well, then you can't agree. But it might be that we can make things better for the neighbors now.
Additional comment from the board? John Hart, do you have anything that you'd like to add, Deputy County Attorney?
I don't have anything to add unless the commission has questions for me.
Did we miss something big?
I can't imagine what it was.
So I guess in terms of next steps, it's a little bit difficult sitting here on a late afternoon on a Thursday here to determine what time it will take for a groundwater investigation. So, I mean, we can do one of a couple of things. We can either identify on the calendar a tentative date, date certain that we will reconvene and take this up again, or the applicant could get back to us, applicant and the Carlton Protective Trust could get back to us in terms of at what point in time you will have had the conversations you need to have also. So that's not an either or, it's a both and there. Josh?
Just asking the Carlton Protective Trust and Western, how much time would you guys need to have such negotiation?
Well, I would say we'd like to do both, which would negotiate with them. And then also we probably will produce our own hydrologic report to share with you all. So I'd say 6 months.
Whatever works for you is okay with us.
Mr. Kappas. And if you feel like you cannot answer this with a straight face today, we don't have to. You can get back to us.
Well, I think we can have those discussions as soon as we can get the parties together. I guess in my mind, the water investigation or study would be something we would agree to as part of mitigation before we started mining, so that I guess I'm not seeing that it has to push this process further before we do a water study, because what we'd be agreeing to is if the water study we will do the water study and mitigate those impacts before we expand into the mine. So knowing that water studies can take some time, I think we could keep this process moving forward to see if we can reach some mitigation.
Does that 6 months work for you?
I guess what maybe we're crossing paths here. I don't think that this body is ready to take action short of having a water investigation in hand. Or am I incorrect? Or
I'd agree with that, Dave. I'd like to have some information and not rely on something in the future that when they expand, then they'll do it.
Yeah, Tyler.
I have a fairly relevant question. I presume your contract to buy the land has some sort of end date. Is that an issue?
That is correct. So
do you have that end date that we?
I'd have to look to see, but I guess we can get back to you. I don't know how long a water study is going to take. I don't know what the scope of it is. I've been involved in past career in a lot of water studies, and it kind of depends on what the scope of the study is.
Knock that out.
Okay, come on up, Mr. Coppice.
Obviously, I think he's correct. The scope is obviously, if we're talking about 3D numerical modeling of groundwater flow, that's a pretty sophisticated process. If we're talking about a 2-page report, that's something that a hydrologist could prepare in 2 weeks.
You guys got to talk it out.
Yeah, so I guess, my guess is we're probably not going to be on the same page about that, but we will work it out. I guess what I'm thinking of is I've got to go find somebody that's got the time to do this for me. I've got to retain them, get them material. They're going to have to review groundwater wells in the area. They're going to have to look at research from the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology, et cetera. They're going to have projects that they're already doing. So that's why I came up with 6 months, is I think I can reasonably have somebody that could prepare a report that would not be on one extreme or the other within 6 months. And I would assume they could do the same.
John Hart, were you going to say something there?
Probably nothing that anybody else was going to say, but perhaps we set 2 dates. One date that would be sooner, that we would take this up after there is not a meeting of the minds between the parties, presuming that happens. Another date much longer out, more along the lines of 6 months, Mr. Coppice is suggesting, assuming that the scope of this water study can be agreed to.
So Jenny, do we have in the shorter term a date where all of us assembled here are available that we could get on the calendar?
I do. I know for the 3 of you, it would depend on Shane and Tyler, June 27.
Well, that will probably be enough time for them to at least determine if they're going to have any agreement.
And then, so kind of keying off of John's suggestion of a short-term date and a longer-term date, I would suggest a short-term one, which is about 7 weeks, June 27. And then the longer-term one, Cheryl's checking to see if November 7 has the 3 of you here. Again, would have to check your schedules. November 7, that's 6 months.
Well, how about we
December?
How about we begin with the shorter term date and the longer term date yet to be determined? Although it looks like Jamie, you might have something to add. Whoa. Oh, jeez. Liability claim there. Okay.
I don't think that June 27th will work for us for a hearing date. So
it will not work for you.
Then
so
we're
there's
looking
not
further out. So that would
can
be.
we go 1 week before that?
There's no meeting on the 20th. They don't, unless, can you?
Yeah, we can make one if we want.
Is there anything available? Is there anything going on?
Shane.
Shane.
Yes, that's a great
So that we
idea.
can then take the whole day? Is that what you're suggesting? Okay.
So we need to pick that day and time now. June 20th would be a special meeting of the commission. And if you guys think you can be there.
I'm here. I'm not.
Yeah. If you're amenable to a special meeting, June 20th certainly works. We could start it at 10 a.m. or something, 10 a.m. on the 20th.
Yeah, we can cancel some other meetings. 9 or 10 a.m. Preference? Shane?
I'm here. Yeah, whatever works.
9?
9. Let's do 9.
Okay, we are proposing to reconvene the Planning and Zoning Commission on June 20th at 9 a.m. for a status check or take action, depending on how the conversations go between Western Materials and the Carlton Protection Trust.
Jamie, were you?
And it would be a reconvening of both the Planning and Zoning Commission and the County Commissioners.
Yes, that would be correct. Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody, not just for coming, for giving your time, but for behaving really well. This is a lot of emotion. It's people's homes, their kids, their water. I think you guys, everybody did a really great job. And as a fellow human being, I appreciate that.
Jamie,
said.
did you have anything else? Will that date work? June 20th? Tentatively June 20th. Yeah, I'll just echo Commissioner Slotnick's comments. I hope that folks recognize that we are not being hasty here. We hear your concerns and are trying to do our due diligence to make sure that this situation works for as many parties as possible. Is there?
Third that.
Thank you, Commissioner Vero. Deputy County Attorney.
Is it fair to say that we'll keep things posted on Missoula County Voice? And just on that issue of Missoula County Voice, one of our crack communications staff told us today about problems that we have been having with this particular page, just for this project on Missoula County Voice. We very much apologize for those problems. We've been working with the vendor to try to find out what the issue is and resolve this. And we know that a lot of people were frustrated trying to post comments to it, and know that this is a one-off in the 2 years that we've had this product, and we don't think we're going to continue to have these problems. So when I say we'll continue to keep you updated on Missoula County Voice, we're going to do our very best.
Thank you, John. And is there any other business to come before the commission today? Seeing none, thank you everyone online and in the room, and we will be adjourned.